I never thought I would be the kind of woman who would strategically plan to destroy her husband's life. Yet here I was, sitting in my car outside our favorite restaurant, divorce papers tucked neatly in a gift bag alongside a bottle of his favorite whiskey, watching the minutes tick towards 7 o'clock. Our 10th anniversary dinner, the reservation he'd made weeks ago, insisting we needed to reconnect. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 months ago, I believed I was living a love story. Now I knew better. The rain tapped gently against my windshield, mirroring the steady rhythm of my heart. I wasn't nervous anymore. The trembling hands and nausea had subsided weeks ago, replaced by a cold, steady resolve that sometimes frightened me when I caught my reflection in the mirror. I hardly recognize myself these days. The woman who once cried during commercials about long-distance relationships now methodically planned her husband's downfall with spreadsheets and timelines. Just breathe, Eliza, I whispered to myself, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back at me looked polished, confident, red lips, hair styled perfectly, wearing the dress David had always loved. Everything calculated for maximum impact. I wanted him to remember exactly what he was losing in excruciating detail. My phone buzzed with a text from him, running 5 minutes late. Traffic. Can't wait to see you. Love you. Love you. The words that once made my heart flutter now turned my stomach. I typed back a cheerful response, complete with a heart emoji. The performance had to be flawless until the final curtain. I reached for the gift bag beside me, peeking inside at the manila envelope containing the divorce papers. Beside it, the bottle of 18-year-old Macallan whiskey, a cruel reference to the exact bottle he'd been drinking the night I discovered everything. I had wrapped the divorce papers in beautiful anniversary paper, making them look like a thoughtful gift. The card attached simply read, "To new beginnings." A bitter smile crossed my face as I remembered how different our last anniversary had been. Dinner at this same restaurant where David had raised his glass and toasted to many more decades of happiness. I'd believed him then. I'd believed every word. I closed my eyes, letting my mind drift back to the day everything changed. Not the day I discovered his betrayal. No, that came later. The real beginning of the end was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday 3 months ago. "Liz, have you seen my blue tie? The one with the little diamonds?" David called from our bedroom. I was in the kitchen preparing his usual breakfast smoothie: kale, protein powder, berries, and a splash of almond milk. A concoction he claimed kept him fighting fit for his long days at the law firm where he'd recently made partner. "Check the dry cleaning in your closet," I called back, pressing the blend button. The whirring noise momentarily drowned out his response. He appeared in the doorway moments later, the tie already knotted perfectly at his throat. At 42, David Matthews still looked like the man I'd fallen in love with in law school. Tall, with salt and pepper hair that only made him more distinguished, and laugh lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. That morning, he was smiling. "Found it," he said unnecessarily, crossing the kitchen to plant a kiss on my cheek. "You're the best, you know that?" I handed him the smoothie. "So you tell me. Big case today? Deposition for the Harcourt merger. Could run late." He checked his watch, the vintage Omega I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. "Don't wait up, okay?" "I might," I teased, straightening his tie. "It's pasta night." He groaned appreciatively. "Your carbonara? Now I'm torn. I'll save you a plate." David gulped down half the smoothie, grabbed his briefcase, and headed for the door. "Love you, Liz," he called over his shoulder. "Love you too," I responded automatically. It was the last normal morning we would ever have. The last time those words would leave my lips without tasting like ash. Looking back, I wonder if some part of me already knew. If there was a slight change in his kiss, or a fraction too much enthusiasm in his goodbye. The human mind is remarkably skilled at preserving its own happiness, at overlooking the hairline fractures until the whole structure comes crashing down. That day, I went about my routine as usual. I worked from home, finishing an article for the literary magazine where I served as contributing editor. I called my sister to chat about her kids. I even started marinating chicken for David's carbonara, assuming he'd make it home despite his warning. Around 4, my laptop died unexpectedly, a complete system failure. With a deadline looming the next morning, I needed David's laptop to finish my work. He kept a spare one at home that he rarely used since his firm provided his main computer. I knew where he kept it, in his home office desk drawer. What I didn't know was that retrieving that laptop would detonate my entire life. The laptop powered up normally, and I quickly located my half-finished article in my cloud drive. But as I opened my email to send myself some research notes, I noticed David's email was still logged in. I was about to close it when a notification popped up, an email from an A. Parker? With the subject line, "Missing you already." I shouldn't have clicked it. Some small voice inside me warned against it. But another louder voice whispered that married people shouldn't have secrets. That voice sounded remarkably like my mother's. The email was short. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait until your deposition next week. Same hotel? A PX?" My hand froze on the mouse. The room suddenly seemed airless, as though someone had sucked all the oxygen out through an invisible straw. I clicked on the email thread, scrolling up to see previous messages. "Can't stop thinking about you in that red lingerie. Tell your wife you have another late meeting. I'll be waiting. 7 months and I still can't get enough of you. 7 months. 7 months of late meetings. 7 months of depositions and client dinners. 7 months of me believing his excuses, preparing his favorite meals, washing his clothes, sharing his bed. I don't remember much about the next few hours. I know I printed dozens of emails. I know I searched his name alongside A. Parker, and discovered an Amanda Parker who worked at his law firm as a junior associate, 28 years old according to her LinkedIn profile, 14 years younger than me. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor at some point, staring at the marble tiles we'd picked out together during our renovation 2 years ago. I remember thinking how stupid it was to care about marble tiles when your husband was sleeping with someone else. When I heard his key in the lock shortly after 9, I had composed myself. The emails were hidden away. The carbonara was in the fridge, untouched. I was in bed with a novel I wasn't reading, wearing the silk pajamas he had given me for Christmas. "Liz?" he called, his footsteps moving through our home with familiar confidence. "Still awake?" "In here," I answered, my voice impressively steady. He appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie, that blue tie with little diamonds that I now wanted to use to strangle him. "Hey, beautiful." "Sorry I'm so late. How was the deposition?" I asked, watching his face carefully. Not a flicker of guilt, not a moment's hesitation. "Brutal. Opposing counsel was out for blood." He sat on the edge of the bed, removed his watch. "Did you make pasta?" "It's in the fridge. I wasn't very hungry." He frowned, noticing my untouched water glass, the too tight grip I had on my book. "Everything okay?" I almost broke then, almost screamed and threw things and demanded answers. But something cold and clear crystallized in my chest at that moment. The realization that I wanted more than an ugly confrontation. I wanted justice. I wanted him to suffer the way I was suffering. I smiled. "Just tired. Laptop died today and threw off my whole workflow. You should have called me. I could have helped." I managed. I turned a page I hadn't read. "How's Amanda doing?" His hand paused minutely in the act of unbuttoning his shirt. So slight I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching for exactly that reaction. "Amanda? The new associate? You mentioned she was working on the Harcourt case with you." The lie came smoothly, his expression perfectly neutral. "Oh, she's fine. Sharp kid. Works hard. Kid." I was 39 to her 28, and he called her kid. "That's good," I said, matching his casualness. "You need good people on your team." He nodded, continuing to undress, hanging his suit with the usual care. I watched him perform this ritual I'd observed thousands of times before, feeling as though I was watching a stranger. This man who moved around our bedroom, who would soon slide into bed beside me, was unknown to me. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his even breathing. I thought of the carbonara in the fridge, made with ingredients I'd carefully selected that morning when my world was still intact. I thought of Amanda Parker in red lingerie. I thought about the fact that their affair had started around the time David and I had finally agreed to stop trying for a baby after 3 years of heartbreaking failures. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears would come later, in private moments when the shock gave way to grief. Instead, I began to plot. Because if there's one thing being married to a brilliant attorney for 10 years teaches you, it's how to build a case. And I intended to build mine meticulously before rendering judgment. The weeks that followed required the greatest acting performance of my life. I maintained our routine, asked about his day, cooked his meals, and even continued to have sex with him, all while secretly documenting his lies, gathering evidence, and planning my exit. I hired a private investigator, depleting a significant portion of my personal savings in the process. I needed incontrovertible proof, not just for the divorce proceedings, but for my own sanity. Part of me still hoped there was some explanation, some elaborate misunderstanding that would restore my world to its axis. The PI delivered within 2 weeks. Photographs of David and Amanda entering a boutique hotel downtown, time-stamped images of them dining in a restaurant 40 miles away, evidence of a weekend trip to the coast when David had told me he was at a legal conference in Chicago. The final report included a particularly gut-wrenching image of them walking hand in hand through a neighborhood I recognized, the family-friendly suburb we had once considered moving to when we were trying to conceive. The night I received the final report, I locked myself in our guest bathroom and truly broke down for the first time. I sobbed until I retched, muffling my cries with a towel as David watched television in the living room, oblivious. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the magnitude of it, the calculated nature of his deception, the realization that while I had been grieving our inability to have a child, believing we were in it together, he had simply moved on to a younger model with better prospects. When I emerged hours later, eyes swollen but dry, a new emotion had taken root alongside the grief. Rage. Cold, clarifying rage that sharpened my focus and straightened my spine. I began consulting with divorce attorneys in neighboring counties, careful to find ones who would never cross paths with David professionally. I documented our finances, made copies of tax returns, photographed valuables, and began discreetly moving my personal possessions to a storage unit. I opened a new bank account at a different bank and gradually transferred funds from my personal savings. All the while, I smiled at my husband, asked about his day, and pretended I didn't notice the growing frequency of his late nights at the office. The most difficult part was maintaining relationships with our friends, continuing to appear at social gatherings as the perfect couple while knowing our marriage was a fiction. I found myself scrutinizing every interaction, wondering who else might know. Had he confided in his best friend Mark? Did Sarah, my maid of honor at our wedding, suspect anything when David checked his phone constantly during dinner parties? At one such gathering, about a month after my discovery, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Mark's wife, Julia. "Are you okay, Liz?" she asked, her voice lowered as she helped me arrange dessert plates. "You seem, distant lately." I forced a smile. "Just stressed with work. Deadline season." She nodded, but her eyes held concern. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? That's what friends are for." For a brief, wild moment, I considered telling her everything, unburdening myself to someone, anyone, but the words wouldn't come. Admitting it out loud would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for yet. And more practically, I couldn't risk my plans leaking back to David before I was ready. "I know," I said instead, squeezing her hand gratefully. "I'm fine, really. Just tired." Later that night, as David drove us home, he reached across the console and took my hand. "You were quiet tonight, was I?" I kept my voice light, staring out at the passing streetlights. "Julia mentioned she's worried about you." I turned to look at him, studying his profile in the dim light. Did he actually care, or was this just part of his performance as devoted husband? That's sweet of her, but unnecessary. "I'm fine." He squeezed my hand. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" The audacity nearly made me laugh. Here he was, carrying on a 7-month affair while asking if I would tell him if something was wrong. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "Of course," I lied smoothly. "Always." As my evidence mounted and my escape plan solidified, I began to focus on the exact nature of my revenge. Simply serving him with divorce papers seemed inadequate given the calculated cruelty of his betrayal. I wanted something that would cut to the quick, that would remain with him long after our marriage was legally dissolved. The idea came to me during one of my secret consultations with Diane, my divorce attorney. She had asked when I wanted to file the papers. "I want to maximize impact," I told her. "When would hurt most?" Diane, a 50-something veteran of hundreds of divorce cases, raised an eyebrow. "Legally speaking, timing doesn't matter. Emotionally speaking?" She shrugged. "Special occasions tend to twist the knife. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries?" I suggested, a plan already forming. "Those work too." She studied me over her reading glasses. "Just be prepared for blowback. People don't react well to public humiliation." He should have thought of that before sleeping with his associate for 7 months. She nodded, conceding the point. "Your 10th, isn't it? A milestone." "Yes." I smiled grimly. "The traditional gift is tin or aluminum, but I think papers are more appropriate. Our anniversary was 6 weeks away." As the date approached, David began dropping hints about his plans for our celebration. He mentioned reservations at Maison Laurent, the French restaurant where he had proposed. He arranged for my friends to take me shopping for a new dress, claiming he wanted me to feel special. He even started coming home earlier, being more attentive, bringing flowers for no reason. The irony was excruciating. Just as I was finalizing plans to end our marriage, he seemed to be recommitting to it. I almost wondered if he had somehow discovered my intentions and was attempting to counter them. But the PI I kept on retainer confirmed he was still seeing Amanda, albeit less frequently. Perhaps guilt was finally catching up with him, or maybe he simply wanted to maintain his comfortable home life while continuing his affair more discreetly. Either way, his renewed attentiveness only strengthened my resolve. Each bouquet of flowers, each surprise kiss, each whispered, "I love you," was further evidence of his capacity for deception. 2 weeks before our anniversary, David surprised me with a weekend trip to a luxury resort in wine country, a pre-anniversary celebration, he called it. "I know the actual day falls on a Wednesday," he explained as we drove through rolling vineyards. "So I thought we could do something special beforehand, then have our traditional dinner on the day itself." I smiled, ignoring the churning in my stomach. "It's perfect." The resort was beautiful, all stone and glass overlooking acres of grapevines. Our suite featured a private terrace with a hot tub, a king-sized bed strewn with rose petals, and a complimentary bottle of champagne. Under different circumstances, I would have been touched by his thoughtfulness. As we unpacked, I noticed David checking his phone frequently, his expression carefully neutral. I wondered if Amanda was messaging him, if she knew where he was and who he was with. Did it bother her that he still maintained this facade with me? Or did she view me with pity, the oblivious wife living on borrowed time? That evening, over a candlelit dinner at the resort's Michelin-starred restaurant, David raised his wine glass. "To us," he said, 10 years of adventure. "You're still the best decision I ever made." I clinked my glass against his, wondering how he managed to say such things without choking on them. "To us," I echoed. "And to truth." He didn't catch my emphasis, too busy signaling the waiter for more wine. As he launched into a story about a colleague's courtroom mishap, I studied him, trying to reconcile this charming, attentive man with the callous adulterer I now knew him to be. That night, he initiated sex. I almost refused. The thought of his hands on me now revolted me, but it was crucial to maintain the illusion until the end. So I performed, just as he did, moving through the motions of intimacy while feeling utterly detached. When he whispered that he loved me as he climaxed, I whispered it back, the words hollow and meaningless. Afterward, as he slept beside me, I slipped out onto the terrace, wrapped in a plush hotel robe. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. I sipped leftover champagne directly from the bottle and allowed myself to remember the early days of our relationship. I had loved him once, truly, deeply, without reservation. We had been law students with big dreams. He would become a crusading defense attorney. I would write legal thrillers inspired by his cases. Reality had altered our paths. He'd been seduced by corporate law's hefty paycheck, and I'd found my niche in literary journalism, but our partnership had remained strong, or so I'd thought. We had weathered career disappointments, the death of his father, my miscarriages. Through it all, I had believed we were a team, unbreakable. How had we gone from that to this hollow pretense? When had he decided I wasn't enough? What could I have done differently? I shook my head, banishing that last thought. This wasn't about my failings. This was about his choices, his betrayal, his lies. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of wineries, gourmet meals, and forced smiles. By Sunday evening, my face ached from the effort of pretending everything was fine. As we drove home, David reached across the console to take my hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his eyes on the road ahead. "Maybe we should revisit the baby conversation." I froze, my breath catching. After 3 miscarriages and countless fertility treatments, we had agreed to stop trying a year ago. The decision had broken my heart, but I'd accepted it as final. "What changed your mind?" I asked carefully. He shrugged, thumb stroking my knuckles. "I don't know. This weekend reminded me of what's important. Family. Us. I think I'm ready to try again. Maybe look into adoption this time." The cruelty of it staggered me. Was this guilt talking? A desperate attempt to recommit to our marriage? or something more calculated, a way to bind me to him more tightly, to complicate the divorce I was planning. Whatever his motivation, it crystallized my resolve. Using our shared pain over infertility as a manipulation tactic was unforgivable. "I'll think about it," I said, pulling my hand away under the pretense of adjusting the air conditioning. The final pieces of my plan fell into place over the following days. I confirmed the anniversary dinner reservation at Maison Laurent. I purchased the bottle of Macallan whiskey. I finalized the divorce papers with Diane, arranging for them to be ready for service on our anniversary. I selected my outfit with surgical precision. The red dress David had always said made me look radiant, paired with the diamond earrings he'd given me on our 5th anniversary. The night before, I barely slept, rehearsing every aspect of my plan. The timing, the words, the exit strategy. By morning, I felt oddly calm, as though I had passed through fire and emerged transformed. David left for work with his usual kiss and a reminder about our 7 p.m. reservation. "Wear something incredible," he said, eyes twinkling. "I have a surprise for you." I smiled. So do I. And now here I was, sitting in my car outside Maison Laurent, divorce papers in hand, preparing to detonate my marriage. I took one final deep breath and stepped out into the light rain, gift bag in hand. The maitre d' recognized me as I entered, greeting me warmly. "Mrs. Matthews, welcome back. Your husband is already seated." He gestured toward a private alcove in the back, the same table where David had proposed a decade earlier. "Thank you, Henri." I smoothed down my dress, squared my shoulders, and walked through the restaurant with measured steps. David stood as I approached, his smile genuine, eyes lighting up at the sight of me. He looked handsome in his charcoal suit and blue tie, the same one from that ordinary Tuesday 3 months ago. "You look stunning," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Absolutely beautiful." "Thank you." I set the gift bag on the chair beside me as he held out my seat. "Sorry I'm a little late." "Worth the wait." He grinned, resuming his seat. "I already ordered champagne." Right on cue, a waiter appeared with an ice bucket and 2 flutes. As he poured, I noticed a small velvet box on the table beside David's plate. My stomach tightened. A gift. Of course there would be a gift. I hadn't considered that in my planning. David noticed my gaze. "That's for later," he said, winking. "First a toast." He raised his champagne flute, eyes locked on mine. "To 10 incredible years with the most amazing woman I've ever known. You've been my rock, my home, my heart. I love you more today than the day I married you, and I can't wait to see what the next decade brings us." The familiar words stuck in my throat, but I forced them out. "To us." We clinked glasses and sipped. The champagne was exquisite, but I barely tasted it. My focus was entirely on maintaining my composure until the moment was right. "I got you something too," I said, nodding toward the gift bag. His eyes lit up. "Can I open it now?" I hesitated, then nodded. This wasn't how I'd planned it. I'd intended to wait until after dinner, but seeing that jewelry box had changed the equation. Better to get it over with. "Please do." David reached for the bag eagerly, removing the tissue paper to reveal the whiskey bottle first. "Macallan 18? My favorite." He looked genuinely touched. "You remembered." "I remember everything," I said quietly. He set the bottle aside and reached back into the bag, pulling out the wrapped package. "There's more? Open it." He tore into the paper, revealing the manila envelope. His brow furrowed in confusion as he opened it and began to pull out the contents. I watched his expression change as realization dawned, confusion giving way to shock, then disbelief, then something like fear. "What is this?" he asked, though we both knew exactly what it was. "Divorce papers." My voice was steady, calmer than I'd expected. "My gift to both of us." His eyes snapped up to meet mine, searching for some sign this was a joke. "Liz, what the hell? Is this some kind of sick prank?" "No prank." I took another sip of champagne, savoring the moment. Just the natural conclusion to a marriage where one party has been cheating for 7 months. All color drained from his face. What are you?" "Amanda Parker," I said, cutting off his stammering denial. "Red lingerie? The Westbrook Hotel. Weekend trips to the coast. Should I continue, or are we past the denial phase?" His mouth opened and closed silently. Several emotions flashed across his face in quick succession: shock, guilt, anger, calculation. Finally, he settled on contrition. "Liz, I can explain." "It's not what you think." "Save it." I held up a hand. The PI I hired took very thorough photographs. "There's really nothing to discuss." "A pie?" Anger flared briefly. "You've been spying on me?" "No, David. I've been gathering evidence." There's a difference. I gestured to the envelope in his hands. You'll find it's all very fair. I'm not asking for alimony, just an equitable division of assets. My lawyer assures me it's quite generous given the circumstances. He stared at me, seemingly unable to process what was happening. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant hum of conversation and clinking glasses, oblivious to the implosion occurring at our table. How long have you known? He finally asked, voice barely above a whisper. 3 months. His eyes widened. 3, but you've acted completely normal. We just spent a weekend together. We had sex, for God's sake. Yes. I met his gaze steadily. I'm a better actor than you gave me credit for, much like you're a better liar than I ever imagined. The waiter approached with menus, then retreated hastily upon sensing the tension. David leaned forward, lowering his voice. We need to talk about this. Not here. Let's go home. There's nothing to talk about. And I'm not going home with you. I reached into my clutch, removed a hotel key card. I've already moved my essential items to a suite at the Four Seasons. You'll find I've left most of the furniture, though I did take some family heirlooms from my side. You're being ridiculous. His shock was giving way to anger now. You can't just end a 10-year marriage over dinner without even giving me a chance to explain. Actually, I can. And I am. I finished my champagne and set the glass down precisely. You had 7 months of chances to explain, to come clean, to end things honorably. Instead, you lied to my face every single day. You watched me grieve our inability to have children while you were starting a new life with someone else. His face contorted. That's not fair. Do you know what's not fair, David? My voice remained low, but there was steel beneath it now. Not fair is making me carbonara while you're still smelling of another woman's perfume. Not fair is talking about adoption as a manipulation tactic. Not fair is proposing we're connect on our anniversary when you've been disconnecting piece by piece for over half a year. He flinched at each accusation, but I wasn't done. Most of all, not fair is denying me the chance to make an informed decision about my own life. You stole that from me for 7 months. So no, I don't owe you a chance to explain. David's expression shifted again, calculation replacing anger. He reached across the table for my hand. I let him take it, curious to see his next move. I made a terrible mistake, he said, voice breaking slightly. The worst mistake of my life. But I love you, Liz. I've always loved you. Amanda was a distraction, a midlife crisis, I don't know. But she's not you. No one could ever be you. I studied him, noting the perfect catch in his voice, the hint of moisture in his eyes. It was a masterful performance. Had I not spent the past 3 months analyzing his every deception, I might even have believed him. So it's over with her? I asked, allowing a hint of uncertainty into my voice. Hope flickered in his eyes. Yes, completely. I ended it weeks ago. And there it was, one final damning lie. My PI had photographed them together just 3 days ago, entering the Westbrook Hotel at 9:17 p.m. and leaving separately the next morning. I withdrew my hand. Goodbye, David. I stood, gathering my clutch and coat. David rose as well, panic evident now. Liz, please. We can work through this. Couples therapy, a fresh start, whatever you need. Don't throw away 10 years over one mistake. 7 months isn't a mistake. It's a choice. A series of choices made day after day. I stepped away from the table. You should look at page 12 of the filing, by the way. It includes a fascinating analysis of our joint finances, including the apartment you've been renting in Amanda's building for the past 3 months. Not exactly the action of a man who ended it weeks ago. His face went slack with shock. The reservation is paid for. Enjoy your dinner. I nodded toward the velvet box. And whatever anniversary gift you had planned, perhaps Amanda would appreciate it. I turned and walked away, keeping my pace measured, my posture straight. I could feel the eyes of other diners following me, could hear the hushed whispers starting. Behind me, David called my name once, then fell silent. Outside, the rain had stopped. The night air felt cleansing against my heated skin. As I walked toward my car, a strange sensation bubbled up from my chest, something between a laugh and a sob. I had done it. After months of performing, of gathering evidence, of planning, I had finally reclaimed my truth. I didn't look back at the restaurant as I drove away. Whatever expression David wore now, rage, despair, calculation of his next move, was no longer my concern. For the first time in 7 months, possibly longer, I was free. The hotel suite I'd booked was on the 30th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I kicked off my heels, poured myself a glass of the wine I'd had delivered earlier, and stood at the window, watching the lights spread out below me like constellations. My phone began ringing almost immediately. David, of course. I silenced it, then turned it off completely. Whatever desperate pleas or angry accusations he wanted to hurl could wait. Tonight was for me. I changed out of my red dress into soft pajamas, removed my makeup, and slipped between the luxurious hotel sheets. Tomorrow would bring complications, telling friends and family, formally moving out, navigating the actual divorce proceedings. But tonight, in this quiet moment of victory, I allowed myself to simply breathe. I thought of the woman I'd been 3 months ago, sobbing on the bathroom floor. I thought of the woman I'd become, someone capable of maintaining a perfect facade while methodically planning her exit. Neither version felt quite right, but perhaps that was to be expected. This was uncharted territory. As I drifted towards sleep, I realized I hadn't cried. Not a single tear. Perhaps they would come later, when the adrenaline faded. Or perhaps I had already shed all the tears David Matthews deserved. Either way, I had served my verdict. And for the first time in a very long time, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, unburdened by lies, his or my own. Morning arrived with relentless sunlight streaming through the windows I'd forgotten to cover. I blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory flooded back. The restaurant, the divorce papers, David's shocked face. My new reality. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, hesitating before turning it back on. When I did, notifications cascaded in. 15 missed calls from David, 23 text messages, 3 voicemails. I ignored them all, scrolling instead to a text from Diane, my lawyer. He called the office first thing this morning. Demanded answers. I shut it down. Call me when you're ready. So David had moved to the anger phase already. That was faster than I'd anticipated. I had expected at least a day of desperate pleas before the legal maneuvering began. I texted back a quick acknowledgement to Diane, then ordered room service, coffee, fresh fruit, and pastries. As I waited, I scrolled through the other notifications. Messages from friends expressing concern, probably alerted by David. A missed call from my sister. An email from my mother with the subject line, "What on earth is going on?" News traveled fast. I wasn't ready to face any of them yet, to explain or defend my actions. Instead, I opened the curtains wider, letting sunlight flood the room, and began making lists. Practical steps for the days ahead. People to contact, items to retrieve from the house. The room service arrived, and I ate on the balcony, watching the city come to life 30 stories below. It struck me that this was the first breakfast in years I had prepared for no one but myself. No smoothie for David, no consideration of his preferences or schedule. Just my own hunger, my own choices. It felt both liberating and terrifyingly untethered. Mid-morning, I finally listened to David's voicemails, steeling myself for manipulations or threats. The first, sent minutes after I left the restaurant, was almost incoherent, a jumble of apologies, pleas, and accusations delivered in a whispered rush, presumably from the restaurant bathroom. The second, sent around midnight, was more controlled but no less desperate. "Liz, please. We need to talk in person. What you're doing? This isn't you. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. 10 years, Liz. That has to mean something. Call me back, please." The third, sent at 5 a.m., was different. The desperation had hardened into something colder. "My lawyer will be contacting yours. You think you figured everything out, but you have no idea what you're doing. This isn't going to go the way you think." I deleted all 3 without response. His emotional trajectory was predictable: shock, desperation, anger, threats. I had anticipated each phase, and Diane was well prepared for whatever legal challenges he might mount. At noon, I finally made my first call to my sister Kate. She answered immediately. "Lizzie? Oh my God, are you okay? David's been calling everyone looking for you." "I'm fine." I moved to the window, phone pressed to my ear. "I'm at a hotel. Did he tell you what happened?" "Only that you had some kind of breakdown at dinner and served him with divorce papers. He's worried sick. Says you've been acting strange for weeks." Of course, that would be his narrative, that I was unstable, irrational. Did he mention he's been cheating on me for 7 months? Silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "What?" I explained everything, finding the emails, hiring the PI, gathering evidence, planning my exit. Kate listened without interrupting, cursing softly only when I mentioned the apartment he'd rented in Amanda's building. "That absolute bastard?" she said when I finished. "I'll kill him." I laughed despite myself. "Get in line." "Why didn't you tell me? All those months going through this alone? I couldn't risk him finding out before I was ready." And honestly, I wasn't sure I could talk about it without falling apart. Where are you now? I'm coming over. I hesitated. The privacy of the hotel felt like a sanctuary, but the prospect of facing this alone suddenly seemed overwhelming. Four Seasons, room 3012. But Kate, don't tell anyone where I am. Not Mom, not your husband, no one. Of course not, she promised. I'll be there in an hour. After hanging up, I forced myself to answer a few more messages. Brief acknowledgments to close friends, a terse explanation to my mother. To everyone else, I sent a simple auto-reply, taking some personal time. Will respond when I can. When Kate arrived, she pulled me into a fierce hug before I could even close the door behind her. She smelled of the lavender lotion she'd used since college, familiar and comforting. You should have seen his face, I told her as we settled on the sweet sofa with glasses of wine. When he realized I'd known for months that I'd been planning this all along, it was like watching his whole world recalibrate. Good. Kate's voice was hard. I hope he suffers. When I think of how he acted at Mom's birthday last month, the way he doted on you, knowing all along. She broke off, shaking her head in disgust. The performance of it all. That's exactly it, I said, relieved she understood. The performance, making me carbonara after being with her, talking about adoption when he'd been renting an apartment in her building. Even now, trying to paint me as unstable to cover his tracks. I took a long sip of wine. That's almost worse than the cheating, the calculated deception. Kate studied me over her glass. How are you really doing? You seem so composed. I've had 3 months to process, to grieve, to plan. I shrugged. Don't get me wrong, I'm still angry, but the shock has worn off. And what comes next? I gestured around the hotel suite. This for a while? I've booked the room for 2 weeks. Then maybe an apartment, eventually a house of my own. My lawyer thinks the divorce could be finalized within 6 months if David doesn't fight too hard. And if he does fight, then it gets ugly. I set down my glass. But I have the leverage, the evidence. In a courtroom, that matters more than hurt feelings. Kate shook her head slowly. My little sister, the ice-cold revenge queen. I never would have believed it. Neither would I. I smiled wryly. But here we are. Later, after Kate left with promises to check in daily, I stood on the balcony watching the sun set over the city. Below me, thousands of lives continued. People commuting home, couples meeting for dinner, families gathering around tables. Life persisting in all its messy glory. For so long, I had defined myself in relation to David, his wife, his partner, his support system. Now I had to redefine myself on my own terms. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. My phone chimed with a text. Despite my better judgment, I checked it. David, I'm outside the hotel. Please 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I froze, glass halting midway to my lips. How had he found me? Kate wouldn't have told him, which meant he must have tracked my credit card or called every hotel in the city. Another text followed. Security won't let me up without your permission. Just give me 5 minutes, Liz. After 10 years, don't I deserve that much? Did he? Did the man who had lied to me for 7 months deserve even 5 minutes of my time? Against my better judgment, I texted back, lobby bar. 5 minutes exactly. Then you leave. I changed quickly into jeans and a sweater, ran a brush through my hair, and applied minimal makeup. This wasn't about impressing him. It was about facing him on my own terms, with my dignity intact. The elevator ride to the lobby felt interminable. My heart raced, hands clenching and unclenching at my sides. I had been so composed last night, so sure of my path. Why did the prospect of seeing him now fill me with such anxiety? Because last night had been on my terms, my stage, my script. This was improvisation. I spotted him immediately upon entering the bar, hunched at a corner table, nursing what looked like a double whiskey. He was still wearing yesterday's suit, now rumpled, his hair disheveled as though he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He looked up as I approached, eyes widening. Liz. He started to stand. Stay seated, I said, sliding into the chair across from him. Your 5 minutes starts now. He nodded, sinking back down. Up close, I could see he hadn't slept. Dark circles beneath bloodshot eyes, stubble darkening his usually clean-shaven jaw. How did you find me? I asked. I called every hotel in the city. He attempted a weak smile. Started with the 5 stars. Figured you wouldn't settle for less. What do you want, David? He leaned forward, voice low and urgent. I want you to come home. I want a chance to make this right. It can't be made right. I kept my hands folded in my lap, resisting the urge to fidget. You had an affair for 7 months. You lied to my face every day. You rented an apartment in her building. I know, and I can't defend any of it. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. But I can explain if you'll let me. It wasn't about not loving you. It was never that. Then what was it about? Boredom? Her youth? The thrill of getting away with it? He flinched. God, Liz, it was complicated. After the miscarriages, after we stopped trying, you seemed to withdraw. I felt like I'd failed you somehow, like I wasn't enough. Amanda was just there. An escape. A distraction from feeling like a disappointment. I stared at him, incredulous. So this is my fault? Because I was grieving our inability to have children, you needed to sleep with someone else? No, of course not. He reached for my hand. I pulled it back. I'm not blaming you. I'm just trying to explain what was going through my head. It was my weakness, my failure. But it doesn't mean I don't love you. Stop saying that, I said sharply. You don't get to use that word anymore? Love doesn't behave the way you've behaved. He nodded miserably. Fair enough. But I care about you, Liz. More than anyone. These past 3 months, even not knowing you knew, I've been trying to find my way back to you. The weekend trip, the anniversary plans, those were genuine attempts to reconnect. While still seeing her, he didn't deny it. I was trying to end it. It got complicated. Let me simplify it for you, I said coolly. It's over. Our marriage and, I assume, your affair, because I doubt she'll want damaged goods now that you're about to be a very public divorcee. His expression hardened slightly. Is that what this is about? Public humiliation? Punishing me? No. It's about me choosing not to waste any more of my life with someone who could betray me so thoroughly. I glanced at my watch. Your 5 minutes are up. Liz, please. His desperation returned, voice cracking. At least think about counseling. We could... Goodbye, David. I stood, adjusting my sweater. My lawyer will handle all communication from here on out. I'll fight this, he said, rising as well. The division of assets, the house, I'll fight all of it. I met his gaze steadily. You'll lose. But feel free to waste your money and everyone's time. I turned to walk away, but his next words stopped me cold. I saw Amanda last night. After you left? Slowly, I turned back. Congratulations. Not like that, he shook his head. I went to end it properly. To tell her it was over for good. How noble. My voice dripped sarcasm. Only 7 months and a divorce filing too late. I know you don't believe me, and I don't blame you. But it's true. His eyes held mine, pleading for understanding I couldn't give. I made a horrific mistake, Liz. The biggest of my life, and I'll regret it until the day I die. For a brief, disorienting moment, I almost believed him. The David standing before me now, disheveled, desperate, seemingly sincere, was closer to the man I'd married than the polished liar of recent months. But then I remembered the photographs, the emails, the apartment rent payments. The evidence didn't lie, even if he still could. Goodbye, David, I repeated more firmly this time. As I walked back to the elevator, I felt his eyes following me, but he didn't call out again. I didn't look back. In my suite, I poured another glass of wine with shaking hands. The encounter had unsettled me more than I cared to admit, not because I doubted my decision, but because seeing him, the physical reality of him, not just the idea I'd been fighting against, had reawakened the grief I thought I'd processed. This was the man who had held me through 3 miscarriages, who had known exactly how I took my coffee for 10 years, who could make me laugh even on my darkest days, who had been my partner in building a life I'd believed in completely, and he was also the man who had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible, who had made me question my own reality, my own worth, who had robbed me of my agency by lying for 7 months. Both versions were true. That was the hardest part to reconcile. I took my wine to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. Below, I could see David exiting the hotel, shoulders slumped in defeat. He paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the building as though he might somehow spot me 30 floors above. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the flow of pedestrians. My phone buzzed with a text. Not David this time, but Kate. Everything okay? I typed back, getting there, and I was one painful step at a time. The days that followed settled into a strange new rhythm. I worked remotely from my hotel suite, took long walks through parts of the city I'd never explored, and fielded concerned calls from friends and family. Some were immediately supportive, others skeptical of my drastic action. A few, mostly David's friends, stopped contacting me altogether, having chosen their side. David continued his campaign of contrition, sending daily messages that ranged from heartfelt apologies to thinly veiled manipulations. When those went unanswered, he escalated to sending deliveries, flowers, letters, even my favorite desserts from bakeries across the city. I returned everything unopened, with a note from Diane reiterating that all communication should go through our lawyers. A week after the restaurant confrontation, the first legal salvo arrived. David was contesting the division of assets outlined in my filing, claiming I had substantially undervalued his contributions to our marriage. Diane seemed unfazed. "Standard opening move?" she assured me during our conference call. "He's posturing. We have the moral high ground and the evidence. He'll settle once he realizes how bad this could look for his career. And if he doesn't? Then we go to court, and all those lovely PI photos become public record." She paused. "How are you holding up otherwise?" I considered the question. Better than expected, worse than I let on. "It varies by the hour." "That's normal. You're grieving even if the circumstances are unusual." Grieving. Yes, that was the right word for it. I was mourning not just the end of my marriage, but the death of the future I'd imagined. Growing old with David, possibly adopting children, building the life we'd planned together. That future had been a mirage, but the loss of it was still profound. 2 weeks into my hotel stay, I began apartment hunting. I needed a place of my own, somewhere with no memories of David, no echoes of our shared life. I found a sleek one-bedroom in a modern building across town, the opposite of our traditional brownstone in every way. The lease was month to month, perfect for my uncertain circumstances. The day I moved in, Kate helped me shop for essentials: bedding, kitchenware, towels. We avoided the stores David and I had frequented, opting instead for places I'd never been, creating memories uncontaminated by association. "It feels strange," I told her as we arranged my new furniture. "Starting from scratch at 39. "It's not starting from scratch," she corrected, placing a framed photo of our family on my new bookshelf. "It's starting from experience. There's a difference." That night, alone in my new space, I cried for the first time since the night I discovered the affair. Not the desperate, panicked tears of initial betrayal, but quieter, more reflective tears of genuine grief. I allowed myself to feel everything I'd been suppressing during the months of planning and execution: the hurt, the loss, the fear of an uncertain future. It was a necessary catharsis. By morning, I felt lighter, more centered, ready for whatever came next. What came next was an unexpected visitor. I was working at my new kitchen counter when the building's security called to announce that a Julia Reynolds was asking to see me. Mark's wife. Our longtime friend? David's friend first, if I was being honest. Curious, I told security to send her up. When I opened the door, I found Julia looking nervous, clutching her purse strap with white-knuckled fingers. "Hi," she said tentatively. "I hope it's okay that I came. Mark doesn't know I'm here." I stepped back, gesturing her inside. "Of course. How did you find me?" "Kate told me. I promised not to tell anyone else." She hovered awkwardly in my sparsely furnished living room. "I've been trying to call you." "I know. I'm sorry. I moved to the kitchen." "Coffee? Please." As I prepared 2 cups, Julia studied my new space. "It's nice. Different from your old place. That's rather the point." I handed her a mug and led her to the couch, the only comfortable seating in the apartment so far. She sipped her coffee, then set it down with a sigh. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" I knew. Her eyes filled with tears. "About David and Amanda." "I knew and I didn't tell you." My hand froze mid-air, coffee mug suspended. "You knew?" She nodded miserably. "Mark and I saw them together about 4 months ago. At a restaurant in Westchester. Holding hands, kissing. It was unmistakable." I set my mug down carefully, afraid I might drop it. "And you didn't think I deserved to know?" Mark talked me out of it. She wouldn't meet my eyes. He said it would blow over, that David was just going through a phase, that telling you would only hurt you and might end your marriage needlessly. "Needlessly?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter. I know it was wrong. I've felt terrible about it every day since. She finally looked up, "Especially after that dinner at our place when you seemed so down." "I almost told you then, but I convinced myself Mark was right, that it wasn't my place." I sat with the revelation, feeling a complex mix of emotions: anger at being kept in the dark, betrayal by yet another person I'd trusted, but also a strange relief at finally understanding why Julia had seemed so concerned that night. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked finally. Because you deserve to know then, and you deserve the truth now. She twisted her wedding ring anxiously. And because I can't stand the way Mark and some of the others are talking about you, like you're the villain in this story. It's not right. What are they saying? She grimaced. That you've gone crazy. That serving him papers on your anniversary was cruel and vindictive. That you could have handled it privately instead of humiliating him. I laughed, a short, humorless sound. Of course, I'm the cruel one. I know it's not true. That's why I'm here. She leaned forward earnestly. I wanted you to know that I support you, that I'm sorry for my part in keeping you in the dark, and that if you need a friend who understands the real story, I'm here. I studied her, weighing her sincerity against my fresh wariness of trusting anyone connected to David. But the guilt in her eyes seemed genuine, her remorse palpable. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. It couldn't have been easy. It's the least I could do. She hesitated. There's something else you should know. David came to our house last night, talked to Mark for hours. He's not doing well. That's not my concern anymore. I know. I just thought you should be prepared. He's telling people he's going to win you back, that this is all a misunderstanding that got out of hand. I shook my head, incredulous. Even now, he can't accept reality. For what it's worth, I think he genuinely regrets what he did. Not just getting caught, but the affair itself. She shrugged. Not that it changes anything. No, I agreed. It doesn't. After Julia left, I sat alone in my new living room, processing this latest development. So others had known, had seen David with Amanda and chosen to protect him instead of inform me. How many dinner parties had I attended, smiling and laughing while people silently pitied me? How many conversations had stopped when I entered rooms? The humiliation burned anew, but underneath it was a hardening resolve. I had made the right choice in ending things so definitively. There could be no going back, not with so many layers of betrayal exposed. That evening, I received an email from David, the first direct communication since our hotel meeting. The subject line read simply, "Please read." Against my better judgment, I opened it. Liz, I know you've asked me not to contact you directly, but I'm hoping you'll make an exception just this once. There are things I need to say that shouldn't go through lawyers. First, I want you to know that I've ended things with Amanda completely. I know that probably doesn't matter to you now, but I need you to know it wasn't a lie when I told you that at the hotel. It's over. Second, I've withdrawn my contest of the asset division. You can have whatever you want from our life together. I won't fight you on any of it. The house, the investments, even my pension, take it all if it helps you feel that justice has been served. What I can't accept is never speaking to you again. 10 years, Liz. 10 years of building a life together. Of loving each other through everything life threw at us. That has to count for something even now. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not even asking you to stop the divorce. I'm just asking for a conversation. A real one, without time limits or lawyers or public settings. Just us, talking honestly about what happened and where we go from here. If you're willing, I'll meet you anywhere, anytime. If not, I'll respect your decision and communicate through Diane from now on. Either way, I want you to know that I meant what I said. I'll regret what I did to us every day for the rest of my life. David, I read the email 3 times, searching for the manipulation, the hidden agenda, but it seemed, on the surface at least, to be a genuine attempt at, what? Reconciliation? Closure? Or perhaps just an effort to assuage his own guilt? I closed my laptop without responding. Even if his remorse was genuine, even if he had truly ended things with Amanda, the damage was done. Trust, once shattered so completely, couldn't be repaired with a single email or conversation. Still, his offer to stop contesting the divorce was significant. It would make the coming months much simpler, the legal proceedings less contentious. If that was his genuine intent, it was the first truly selfless act he'd committed in a very long time. I forwarded the email to Diane with a brief note. See if he's serious about withdrawing the contest. If so, let's proceed as quickly as possible. Her response came within the hour. On it. Smart not to engage directly. Stay the course. Stay the course. Yes, that was exactly what I needed to do. The path forward was clear, even if it wasn't easy. I would rebuild my life piece by piece, day by day, choice by choice. The scars would remain, but they would be badges of survival, not markers of defeat. That night, I stood on my new balcony watching the city lights, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The anger wasn't gone. It might never be completely gone, but it no longer consumed me. I had taken back my power in the most profound way possible by refusing to let David's betrayal define the rest of my life. I was Eliza Matthews for a little while longer, until the divorce was finalized. Then I would be Eliza Spencer again, reclaiming my maiden name along with my independence. The thought felt like a promise, a horizon line to move toward. David had written that our 10 years together had to count for something. He was right, but not in the way he meant. Those years had shaped me, taught me, brought me both joy and pain. They counted because they had led me here, to this moment of hard-won clarity and newfound strength. I had loved him once truly and deeply. Perhaps I always would, in some small, tucked-away corner of my heart. But I had never needed him to survive. That was the truth I'd rediscovered in these past months. The truth that would carry me forward into whatever came next. As I turned to go inside, my phone chimed with a text from Kate. "Dinner tomorrow? New Italian place just opened downtown." I smiled, typing back, "Absolutely." 7 p.m.? Life continued. And so would I. The legal proceedings moved forward with unexpected speed once David withdrew his contest. Diane seemed almost disappointed at the lack of battle, having prepared for a much more contentious process. "It's unusual," she admitted during our update call, "especially given his initial posturing. But his lawyer says he wants to make this as painless as possible for everyone involved. Do you believe that?" I asked, skeptical of David's apparent change of heart. "It doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is that he's signed everything we've put in front of him." She paused, though I'd be remiss not to mention that he's asked repeatedly if you've read his email. I read it. And nothing. "I'm proceeding with the divorce as planned." Diane made a non-committal sound. "Well, at this rate, you could be officially divorced within 3 months. Possibly sooner. 3 months. The same amount of time I'd spent planning my exit." There was a certain symmetry to it that appealed to me. As spring turned to summer, I settled into my new routines. I redecorated my apartment, creating a space that reflected only my tastes. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my marriage, saying yes to social invitations I would once have declined to accommodate David's schedule. I even started dating, cautiously and casually, more to prove to myself that I could than out of any desire for a new relationship. Through it all, David maintained his distance, communicating only through his lawyer as promised. But I heard about him through our mutual friends, how he'd moved out of our brownstone and into a smaller apartment downtown, how he'd turned down a major case to focus on personal matters, how he seemed changed in ways people couldn't quite articulate. I tried not to care about these reports, to treat them as irrelevant to my new life. But they permeated my consciousness nonetheless, painting a picture of a man struggling with the consequences of his actions. It brought me less satisfaction than I'd expected. 2 months after I'd moved into my apartment, with the divorce nearly finalized, I ran into Amanda Parker at a coffee shop near my office. I had walked in to grab a quick lunch and spotted her at a corner table, head bent over legal documents, oblivious to my presence. My first instinct was to leave immediately, to avoid the awkwardness of this unexpected collision of my past and present. But as I turned to go, a strange calm descended. Why should I be the one to flee? I had done nothing wrong. So I placed my order and waited at the counter, hyper-aware of her presence just 20 feet away. When she finally looked up and saw me, her face drained of color. Our eyes locked across the room, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, to my surprise, she stood and walked directly toward me. "Eliza." Her voice was steady but quiet. "I think we should talk." I studied her. Younger than me, yes, but not the caricature of youth and beauty I'd conjured in my darkest moments. Just a woman, dressed professionally, with shadows under her eyes that suggested she wasn't sleeping well. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," I responded coolly. "Please." She gestured to an empty table nearby. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I hesitated, weighing my curiosity against my pride. Finally, I nodded and moved toward the table. 5 minutes. We sat in uncomfortable silence until my order was called. When I returned with my sandwich and coffee, Amanda was fidgeting with her watch strap, clearly nervous. "I owe you an apology," she began, "though I know it doesn't mean much at this point." "No, it doesn't." She nodded, accepting this. "I want you to know I didn't know you." "Not really. David spoke of you, but always in vague terms. I never saw photos, never knew your name. You were just his wife, an abstraction. Is that supposed to make it better?" I kept my voice low, mindful of other patrons. "No, nothing makes it better. She met my gaze directly. But I want you to know I ended it, not him, despite what he might have told you. This surprised me. When? The night of your anniversary. After you left him at the restaurant. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup as though seeking warmth. He came to my apartment completely undone. Told me everything. How you'd known for months. How you'd planned it all. It was the first time I truly understood the magnitude of what we'd done to you. I said nothing, processing this unexpected version of events. I realized then that he'd been lying to me too, she continued. He'd said your marriage was effectively over, that you stayed together just for appearances. He claimed you were cold, uninterested in him physically or emotionally. She shook her head. But the way he described your confrontation, the way you'd maintained a perfect facade for months while planning your exit, it was clear he'd grossly mischaracterized you. And what you had together? So you dumped him because you realized he was a liar? I couldn't keep the sarcasm from my voice. How ironic. I deserved that. She accepted the barb with a slight wince. But yes, essentially. I ended it because I finally saw him clearly. And because continuing would have made me complicit in even more harm. I took a sip of my coffee, considering her words. Why are you telling me this? Because I thought you should know the truth. Not his version or mine, but what actually happened. She hesitated. And because I want you to know how sorry I am. Not just for the affair, but for believing his characterization of you, for not questioning the story he was selling me. I studied her, searching for insincerity and finding none. What struck me most was how ordinary this moment felt. Two women in a coffee shop having a difficult conversation. Not the dramatic confrontation I might have imagined during my darkest days of discovery. What do you want from me, Amanda? Forgiveness? No. She shook her head firmly. I don't deserve that. And I wouldn't ask for it. I just thought you should have all the facts now that it's almost over. It is over. For all of us. She nodded, then gathered her things to leave. For what it's worth, he really did love you. That much was clear, even on the worst days. If that's what his love looked like, I'm better off without it. She paused, halfway out of her chair. Yes, you are. That's another thing I came to understand. With a sad smile, she added, Take care of yourself, Eliza. I watched her walk away, feeling oddly deflated. The confrontation I had sometimes fantasized about, tearful recriminations, satisfying verbal blows, had instead been this quiet, almost dignified exchange. And I'd learned that even the narrative I'd constructed about David's post-anniversary actions wasn't entirely accurate. It was humbling to realize how many versions of the truth could exist simultaneously, how many perspectives could color the same events. David, Amanda, myself, we had each experienced our interconnected story differently, interpreted actions through our own lenses, ascribed motivations based on our own fears and desires. I finished my lunch slowly, mulling over Amanda's revelations. If she was telling the truth, and strangely, I believed she was, then David had lied to me again at the hotel when he claimed to have ended things with her. Yet the outcome was the same. Their relationship was over. Did the exact sequence of events matter anymore? Did it change anything about my decision to end my marriage? No, I concluded. The betrayal remained the same. The breach of trust was still irreparable. But something had shifted subtly in my understanding of the situation, a recognition that human relationships were messier, more complex than the clean narrative of villain and victim I'd constructed. This realization didn't diminish my resolve to move forward with the divorce. If anything, it strengthened it. I needed to be free of this tangled web of half-truths and competing narratives. I needed to reclaim my story as my own. The following week brought the final divorce hearing, a brief anticlimactic affair in a small courtroom with only our lawyers present. David had waived his right to attend, another surprise in a process that had become unexpectedly straightforward once he'd withdrawn his opposition. As the judge made our divorce official with the stroke of a pen, I felt a complex wave of emotions: relief, sadness, vindication, loss. But strongest of all was a sense of completion. The chapter was closed. The story could move forward. Outside the courthouse, Diane shook my hand with genuine warmth. Congratulations, Ms. Spencer. You're officially a free woman. Thank you. I blinked in the bright sunlight, adjusting to the weight of my reclaimed name. For everything? You did the hard part. She tucked papers into her briefcase. Most clients either never discover the affairs or fall apart when they do. You managed to keep your head and secure a favorable outcome. That's rare. It doesn't feel like a victory. It's not supposed to. Her expression softened slightly. It's supposed to feel like justice. The victory comes later, when you wake up one morning and realize you're happy again. I nodded, hoping she was right. Any idea why he gave in so easily in the end? After threatening to fight everything? His lawyer said he didn't want to drag things out for either of you. She hesitated. There was also a letter for you. I was instructed to give it to you after everything was finalized. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in David's familiar handwriting. I slipped it into my purse without opening it. You don't have to read it, Diane reminded me. That chapter's closed. I know. I shook her hand once more. Thank you again. That evening, alone in my apartment, I finally opened David's letter. It was handwritten on his personal stationery, dated the day he'd withdrawn his contest of our divorce terms. Dear Liz, by the time you read this, our divorce will be final. I've instructed Richard to give this to Diane only after everything is done, so you can read it or burn it as you see fit, without feeling any pressure to respond. First, I want you to know that I've accepted the reality of our situation. I fought it at first, you saw that firsthand. I was angry, then desperate, then calculating. I threatened to contest everything, to make the process as difficult as possible. I'm ashamed of that now. The truth is, I've come to understand that you were right to end our marriage the way you did. The shock of it forced me to face what I'd done in a way that a quieter confrontation might not have. You knew that, I think. You've always understood me better than I understood myself. I won't try to justify my affair with Amanda. There's no justification. What I did was selfish, cowardly, and cruel. The pain I caused you is unforgivable, and I don't expect your forgiveness. But I do want you to know that losing you has been the greatest regret of my life. Not because I got caught, but because I betrayed the one person who always believed in me, even when I didn't deserve it. You should also know that Amanda ended things with me the night of our anniversary. She was right to do so. What we had wasn't love. It was mutual escapism, a way for both of us to avoid dealing with our real lives. I see that clearly now. I've spent these past months in therapy, trying to understand why I did what I did. The easy answer is that I'm selfish and weak. The harder truth is that I was afraid of facing the grief of our inability to have children, afraid of the growing distance between us, afraid of being the one who wasn't enough. So I created a distraction that made me feel powerful and desired without having to confront those deeper fears. None of that excuses my actions, but I hope it helps you understand that it truly wasn't about you or any lack in you. The deficiency was entirely mine. I agreed to your terms without contest because it's the least I can do. The house, the investments, the retirement accounts, take them all. They're poor compensation for the years I stole from you, but they're what I have to offer. I don't know what your life looks like now, or what it will become. I have no right to know, but I hope with all my heart that you find happiness again. You deserve it more than anyone I've ever known. If you ever want to talk, months from now, years from now, never, I'll be there. Not as your husband, not even as your friend, but as someone who will always owe you more than he can repay. Take care of yourself, Liz. You were the best part of my life, even when I was too blind to see it. David. I set the letter down, unexpectedly moved by its sincerity. There was no manipulation here, no subtle attempt to win me back. Just acknowledgement, regret, and release. It was perhaps the most honest communication David had offered in years. I moved to my balcony, letter in hand, watching night descend over the city. The anger that had fueled me for so long felt distant now, like a fire burning itself out in a far-off room. What remained was a quieter, more reflective kind of pain, the ache of something precious lost, not through sudden catastrophe, but through slow, deliberate choices. David had been right about one thing. I had understood him better than he understood himself. I had known exactly how to hurt him most effectively, exactly what would break through his defenses. The carefully orchestrated anniversary revelation had been calculated for maximum impact, designed to shatter his composure along with our marriage. Had that been justice or merely revenge? The line between them had blurred long ago. I reread the letter, then carefully folded it and placed it in a drawer. Not to keep as a memento, but to acknowledge its place in the story of my life. A story that was still being written, page by page, choice by choice. The woman who had served divorce papers to her husband on their anniversary had been shaped by betrayal and rage, driven by a need for justice that bordered on vengeance. She had acted with cold precision, planned with meticulous attention to detail, and executed her revenge flawlessly. But that woman was not the sum total of who I was, or who I would become. She was a necessary incarnation for a specific moment in time, the avenging angel required to cut through lies and reclaim my truth. Now that her work was done, I could allow her to rest. What remained was simply me, Eliza Spencer, 39 years old, starting over with scars and wisdom and a strange new lightness. The future stretched before me, unmarked and full of possibility. For the first time in a very long time, I felt genuinely curious about what it might hold. I leaned against the balcony railing, breathing in the summer air. Below me, the city pulsed with life, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously, each with its own betrayals and reconciliations, its own private victories and defeats. My story was just one among many, neither more tragic nor more triumphant than countless others. That perspective felt like grace. Not the easy forgiveness I could never offer David, but a gentler reckoning with the past, an acknowledgement that even the deepest wounds eventually heal into scars you can live with. The divorce papers I'd served on our anniversary had been both an ending and a beginning. The ending was now complete. The beginning was still unfolding, one day at a time, and for tonight, that was enough. 6 months after the divorce, I found myself standing in the driveway of our former home, David's home now, with a strange sense of disconnection. The familiar brick facade and neatly trimmed hedges belonged to another life, one that felt increasingly distant with each passing day. I'd put off this final retrieval of my belongings, allowing David's lawyer to handle most of the division of our shared possessions. But there remained a few personal items, my grandmother's china, photo albums from before our marriage, a painting I'd inherited from my uncle, that required my presence. David had arranged to be gone during my scheduled visit, another small mercy in a process that had become unexpectedly civilized. His housekeeper, Maria, greeted me at the door with a sympathetic smile and ushered me inside. "He has packed everything in the study, Mrs. Matthews." She caught herself. "Ms. Spencer, I'm sorry." "Thank you, Maria." I squeezed her hand, noting the tears in her eyes. She had been with us for 8 years, had seen the best and worst of our marriage. "And how are you?" "I am fine. She waved dismissively. "But the house, it is not the same without you." I followed her to the study, swallowing the unexpected lump in my throat. The house did feel different, emptier somehow, despite the familiar furniture and artwork. David's presence lingered in the subtle scent of his cologne, in the stack of legal journals on the coffee table, in the whiskey decanter half empty on the bar cart. But mine had been systematically erased, as though I had never lived here at all. In the study, several carefully labeled boxes awaited me. On top lay a sealed envelope, another letter, this one addressed simply, Eliza. I slipped it into my purse without opening it, not ready to engage with David's words in this space that no longer welcomed me. Maria helped me carry the boxes to my car, chatting nervously about neighborhood gossip, the unseasonably warm fall weather, her daughter's college applications, anything to fill the charged silence. When the last box was loaded, she embraced me tightly. "You come visit Maria sometimes, yes?" she whispered. "When he is not here, I will make your favorite paella." "I'd like that," I said, knowing even as the words left my mouth that I would never return. This chapter was closing, and revisiting its setting would only delay the healing I was finally beginning to experience. As I drove away, I resisted the urge to look back in the rearview mirror. The temptation to indulge in melancholy nostalgia was strong but unproductive. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, literally and metaphorically. My new apartment downtown had begun to feel like home. I'd decorated it entirely to my taste. Clean lines, modern furniture, abstract art in bold colors that David would have hated. The space reflected my emerging identity, uncompromised, distinctive, free from the constant negotiation that marriage had required. That evening, after unpacking the boxes from my former life and integrating select items into my new one, I finally opened David's letter, pouring myself a generous glass of wine in preparation. "Eliza, by the time you retrieve these items, our legal ties will have been severed for months. I hope this physical division of our shared possessions brings you closure rather than renewed pain. I've tried to include everything you requested, along with a few items I thought you might want but didn't specifically ask for, photographs from our travels primarily, and the first edition Austen novels my mother gave you. If I've missed anything, please let my lawyer know and I'll ensure it reaches you promptly. I won't burden you with more apologies or explanations. I've said what I needed to say in my previous letter, and anything more would serve my conscience rather than your healing. I just want you to know that I hope these mementos of your life, our life once, bring you comfort rather than sorrow. The house feels empty without you. I've considered selling it, starting fresh somewhere unmarked by memories, but haven't found the courage yet. Perhaps that's fitting punishment, living surrounded by ghosts of my own making. I hope you're finding your way forward. You deserve peace, Eliza. More than anyone I've ever known. David. I folded the letter carefully, neither angry nor moved, just observant of the lingering connection it represented, a tether growing thinner with time, but not yet entirely severed. Like the wedding ring I'd removed months ago, these letters were artifacts of a relationship that continued to shape me even in its absence. I placed the letter with his previous one in a small wooden box, a physical containment of the past. Then I turned my attention to the photographs he'd included, images of us in happier times, standing before the Eiffel Tower, hiking in the Rockies, lounging on Caribbean beaches. The people smiling back at me were strangers now, their expressions of uncomplicated joy artifacts of a different reality. After careful consideration, I kept just one, a candid shot taken by a stranger in Cinque Terre, where we stood looking not at the camera but at each other. It captured something genuine that had existed between us once, before betrayal and revenge had rewritten our narrative. The rest I returned to their envelope, neither discarding them nor displaying them, simply acknowledging their place in my history before moving on. Later that night, as I lay in bed unable to sleep, I reflected on the strange emotional terrain I'd been navigating since the divorce. The initial vindication of my restaurant confrontation had given way to a more complex landscape of feeling, relief mingled with grief, freedom tangled with uncertainty, confidence shadowed by occasional doubt. The most surprising emotion had been the absence of expected hatred. In my darkest planning moments, I had imagined that successfully executing my revenge would sustain a lasting righteous anger, a clean burning flame that would cauterize the wound of betrayal. Instead, anger had gradually receded, leaving behind a more nuanced understanding that neither absolved David nor demonized him. He had been a loving husband who became a serial liar. I had been a devoted wife who became a calculated avenger. We had both contained multitudes. Rolling onto my side, I gazed out at the city lights twinkling beyond my window. This view, so different from the tree-lined street of our brownstone, symbolized my transformation. I had traded the comfortable familiarity of married life for the exhilarating uncertainty of independence. Most days, the trade felt worth it. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Nathan, a divorced architect I'd been seeing casually for the past month. Still on for tomorrow night? Found a new jazz club you'll love. I smiled, typing back confirmation. Nathan understood the complexities of rebuilding after betrayal, having weathered his own painful divorce 2 years earlier. We moved cautiously in our relationship, both aware of our capacity for self-protection, neither rushing toward commitments we might not be ready to honor. It wasn't passionate romance, but it was honest companionship, a refreshing change from the beautiful lies of my marriage's final year. Tomorrow would bring a new day, more steps away from the pain of the past and toward whatever future awaited. I drifted to sleep with this thought, no longer haunted by images of David and Amanda together, no longer fueled by revenge fantasies, simply present in my own evolution, messy, ongoing, and mine. "You're distracted tonight," Nathan observed, his voice cutting through the smoky notes of the saxophone player on stage. We were seated at a small table in the jazz club he'd discovered, sharing a bottle of overpriced but excellent Bordeaux. "Sorry," I offered an apologetic smile. "Work stress." It wasn't entirely a lie. The literary magazine where I'd worked for years had recently undergone management changes, introducing tension into what had previously been a creative sanctuary. But the greater truth was that I'd received a job offer earlier that day, features editor at a prestigious national publication, a significant step up in both responsibility and recognition. The position would require relocating to Chicago, away from the city that still contained too many memories of David. "Want to talk about it?" Nathan's eyes were kind behind his stylish glasses. At 45, he carried the confidence of a man who had survived his own crucible and emerged with greater self-awareness. "Not just yet." I squeezed his hand across the table. Let's enjoy the music. As the quartet launched into a melancholy rendition of Round Midnight, I studied Nathan's profile in the dim light. He was attractive in a cerebral way, with salt and pepper hair and expressive hands that gesticulated enthusiastically when he discussed design concepts. We had been dating for nearly 2 months now, our relationship evolving gradually from coffee meetings to dinners to occasional nights spent at each other's apartments. There was comfort in his company, mutual respect, intellectual compatibility, and a physical connection that, while not overwhelming, was satisfying and tender. By any objective measure, Nathan represented an ideal next chapter, a partner without the complications that had doomed my marriage. Yet the job offer had forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. I wasn't ready to build my new life around another relationship, however promising. The independence I'd reclaimed was too precious, too recently won to compromise. Actually, I said, setting down my wine glass, there is something I should tell you. His expression turned attentive, head tilted slightly. I've been offered a position at Meridian Magazine, features editor. His face brightened. That's fantastic, Liz. Meridian is, well, that's the big leagues. It's in Chicago. Understanding dawned slowly in his eyes. I haven't accepted yet, but I'm strongly considering it. I held his gaze, refusing to soften the truth with equivocation. It feels like an opportunity I shouldn't pass up. Nathan nodded, swirling the wine in his glass thoughtfully. When would you start? January. 6 weeks from now. He absorbed this, his expression giving nothing away. The music swelled around us, the saxophone climbing to a plaintive high note before descending into a mournful pattern. You're taking it, he said finally. Not a question. I think I need to. Because of the career opportunity, or because it's away from here? Away from the ghosts? I considered his question, owing him the honesty he'd always shown me. Both. But if I'm being completely transparent, it's also about not being ready to build my life around someone else's again. Even someone as wonderful as you. A small smile tugged at his lips. That might be the nicest rejection I've ever received. It's not. It's okay, Liz. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. I understand better than most. After Claudia left, I needed to rebuild everything on my own terms. No compromises, no accommodations, just pure selfish autonomy for a while. Relief flooded through me. Yes, exactly that. So you'll go to Chicago, run a prestigious magazine, eat deep dish pizza, and freeze your ass off for 6 months of the year. I laughed. That's the plan, apparently. And we'll... He left the sentence unfinished, a question in his eyes. I'd like to stay in touch, I said carefully. But I think we both know long-distance relationships have their own challenges, even without our particular baggage. Friends, then. He raised his glass. With fond memories. To fond memories? I echoed, clinking my glass against his. And new beginnings. As the evening continued, a weight lifted from my shoulders. Nathan's graceful acceptance of our relationship's natural conclusion reinforced my growing conviction. Chicago represented not just professional advancement, but the next crucial phase of my personal reconstruction. Later, as we walked back to my apartment through streets dampened by a light drizzle, Nathan took my hand casually. Promise me something? What's that? Don't close yourself off completely. His voice was gentle but serious. What happened with David, that was about him, not about what relationships can be. I considered his words, recognizing the concern behind them. In the months since my divorce, I had shared enough of my story for Nathan to understand the depth of betrayal I'd experienced and the calculated revenge I'd enacted. He worried, not without reason, that I might embrace independence at the expense of future connection. I promise I'll stay open to possibilities, I said finally. Just not quite yet, fair enough? He squeezed my hand. Chicago men won't know what hit them. We didn't sleep together that night. Instead, we said a careful goodbye at my door, acknowledging without words that extending our physical intimacy would only complicate an ending we both recognized as necessary. His kiss on my cheek was warm, his whispered, "Be magnificent, Eliza," a benediction that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and moved to the window, watching Nathan's figure recede down the rain-slicked street. Another ending, but this one without rancor or revenge, a gentle closing of a brief but meaningful connection. My phone buzzed with an email from Meridian's editorial director. "We need your decision by Friday." Hoping it's a yes? I typed back immediately. "It's a yes. Looking forward to January." As I prepared for bed, I realized I felt lighter than I had in months, buoyed by the prospect of a future uninhibited by the past. Chicago would have no memories of David, no restaurants where we had celebrated anniversaries, no friends who had known us as a couple. It would be, in the truest sense, a fresh start. Sleep came easily that night, my dreams filled not with the familiar replays of betrayal and confrontation, but with snow-covered cityscapes and the blank page of possibilities. The weeks leading up to my departure passed in a whirlwind of preparations. I sublet my apartment to a visiting professor, sold furniture that wouldn't make the move, and systematically dismantled the life I'd rebuilt post-divorce. Kate hosted a going-away party that brought together friends from various phases of my life, college classmates, work colleagues, neighbors, creating a poignant reminder of the community I was leaving behind. "Chicago isn't Mars," I reminded her as she teared up during a toast. "I'll be back to visit. You'd better," she warned, raising her glass. "To my brave sister, may the Windy City be worthy of her." The gathering was bittersweet, marked by genuine well-wishes and the unspoken acknowledgement that distance inevitably changes relationships. As the evening progressed, I found myself cataloging memories associated with each person present, the collective history that had shaped me into the woman now embarking on this new adventure. Notably absent were friends from our coupled life, those who had been primarily David's friends or who had known us exclusively as a couple. In the aftermath of our divorce, these relationships had withered from neglect or awkwardness. Julia was the exception. She arrived late to the party, pulling me into a fierce hug. "I can't believe you're really leaving," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "It's time." I stepped back, studying her face. "How's Mark?" Her expression clouded slightly. "The same. Still Team David, I'm afraid." "And you're still Team Eliza?" "I'm Team Truth," she corrected, linking her arm through mine as we moved to a quieter corner of Kate's living room. "Which reminds me, I have news you should know before you leave." Something in her tone sent a warning prickle down my spine. "What kind of news?" "David is seeing someone." She watched my face carefully. "It's gotten serious quite quickly." I absorbed this information, probing my emotional response like a tongue exploring a healing wound. There was a twinge, but no acute pain, just a dull acknowledgement that life continued its forward momentum, even for those who had caused profound harm. "Good for him," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity behind my words. "Do I know her?" "No, she's new to the firm." "Lauren something. Started a few months after?" "Everything." I nodded, relieved it wasn't someone from our shared past. "Is she nice?" Julia's eyebrows rose. "That's your question? Whether she's nice?" "What else would I ask?" "I don't know. How about, is she younger? Is it serious? Has he told her about his cheating past?" I smiled, recognizing the protective indignation in her voice. "Those things don't matter to me anymore, Jules. Truly." She studied me skeptically. "So you're telling me you feel nothing about David moving on?" I didn't say that. I took a thoughtful sip of my wine. "I feel, I don't know, a complex mix of things. Relief that he's not pining dramatically, making our mutual friends uncomfortable. A twinge of something like nostalgia for the time when his happiness was intrinsically linked to mine. Maybe even a small hope that he's learned from his mistakes. But not jealousy? No." The realization solidified as I spoke it. I don't want him back. I don't even want him alone and suffering eternally, as satisfying as that might have seemed once. "You're either a saint or the most evolved divorcee in history." I laughed. "Neither. Just someone who's discovered that moving forward is more fulfilling than looking back." Later, as guests began to depart, Julia pulled me aside once more. "There's one more thing," she said hesitantly. "Mark doesn't know I'm telling you this. Now you have to tell me." She glanced around, ensuring our privacy. "David made a substantial anonymous donation to the fertility clinic where you two had treatment, a scholarship fund for couples who can't afford IVF." The news caught me off guard, stirring a complex emotional response I struggled to identify. Why would he do that? Mark says it's his way of honoring what you lost together, making something positive from the pain. I stood silently, processing this unexpected gesture. After our final miscarriage, the grief had been so overwhelming that we'd rarely discussed it, each of us retreating into private mourning. That David would revisit this most painful chapter of our shared history, transforming it into an act of generosity for strangers, suggested a depth of reflection I hadn't anticipated. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. Julia squeezed my hand. I thought you should know he's not entirely the villain your divorce painted him to be. I never thought he was, I admitted, even at my angriest. After the party wound down, I helped Kate clean up, our familiar rhythm of sisterly cooperation unchanged since childhood. Jules told you about David's new girlfriend, she observed, not a question. And about the fertility clinic donation. Kate handed me a plate to dry. Does it bother you? Him moving on? No. I arranged the clean plate in the cabinet. It feels right somehow, like the closing of a circle. And the donation? I paused, considering. That's more complicated. It was unexpected. In a good way? In a humanizing way. I leaned against the counter, searching for words to explain the nuance of my feelings. It's easy to reduce people to their worst actions, to see David solely as the man who cheated, lied, betrayed. This reminds me that he's still the same complex person I loved for a decade, capable of both profound selfishness and genuine compassion. Kate nodded thoughtfully. You know what impresses me most about how you've handled all this? My impeccable taste in revenge strategies? She laughed. No, though that was admittedly masterful. It's your refusal to let bitterness define you. I was plenty bitter. For a while, sure. But you never got stuck there. She dried her hands, turning to face me directly. You allowed yourself to be angry, to plan meticulously, to execute a perfect confrontation, and then you let it go. You didn't make hatred your new identity. Her observation resonated unexpectedly deeply. In the darkest days after discovering David's betrayal, I had embraced rage as a shield against deeper pain. The controlled, calculated revenge I'd enacted had served its purpose, not just as justice for his betrayal, but as a reclamation of my agency when I'd felt most powerless. But Kate was right. I had never intended anger to become my permanent residence. The divorce papers on our anniversary had been an ending designed to enable a new beginning, my beginning, unencumbered by the weight of retribution. I had a good example, I said, bumping her shoulder affectionately. You never did let me wallow for too long, even as a kid. That's what big sisters are for, kicking your ass forward when you'd rather stay stuck. We finished the dishes in companionable silence, the imminent separation lending poignancy to this mundane domestic task. In 3 days, I would board a plane to Chicago, leaving behind not just the physical landscape of my past, but its emotional terrain as well. That night, in the quiet of my increasingly empty apartment, I allowed myself one final ritual of closure. From the wooden box where I'd stored David's letters, I retrieved the first one, his response after our divorce was finalized. I read it again, noting how my emotional response had evolved from the first reading. The words that had once triggered complicated pangs of grief now felt like artifacts from another era, meaningful but distant, like reading a particularly vivid historical account. His expressions of regret and acceptance no longer reopened wounds. They simply acknowledged a shared history that had shaped us both. On impulse, I sat down at my desk and began to write, not a response to his letter exactly, but my own statement of closure. David, as I prepare to leave New York for a new position in Chicago, I find myself reflecting on the journey we've shared, both together and apart. I won't pretend that what happened between us didn't cause profound pain. It did. The betrayal altered something fundamental in how I understand trust, partnership, and my own capacity for both vulnerability and strength. But I want you to know that I don't carry hatred forward with me. The anger that once felt all-consuming has evolved into something more like wisdom, hard-earned insight into human complexity that I wouldn't trade, despite its cost. Julia told me about your donation to the fertility clinic. That gesture speaks to the man I knew. Thoughtful, capable of profound empathy despite your flaws. I hope it brings some healing to the grief we never fully addressed together. I've also heard you're seeing someone new. I genuinely hope this relationship brings you joy and that you've carried forward lessons from our ending. Not because I want reconciliation, that door is firmly closed, but because growth from pain gives meaning to suffering that might otherwise seem senseless. Thank you for handling our legal separation with dignity once the initial shock passed. Your cooperation made a difficult process more bearable for both of us. I don't know if our paths will cross again. New York is large, but not large enough to guarantee we'll never share space at some mutual friends gathering or professional event. If that happens, know that I'll greet you with civility born not from pretense, but from genuine acceptance that our chapter has concluded. Be well, David. The conclusion of our story doesn't erase the meaningful parts that came before. Eliza, I sealed the letter in an envelope, addressing it to our former home. Whether to mail it or not, that decision could wait until morning, when emotion might be tempered by the pragmatic light of day. Sleep came fitfully that night, my dreams a kaleidoscope of past and future, David's face morphing into Nathan's, into unknown figures representing possibilities ahead, our brownstone dissolving into Chicago's skyline, the fertility clinic donation transforming into children we'd never have. I woke before dawn, disoriented but calm, with unexpected clarity about the letter. It wasn't for David at all. It was for me, a formal articulation of forgiveness, not as absolution for his actions, but as liberation from their power to define my future. The writing had been the point, not the sending. I placed the sealed letter in the wooden box with his previous communications, a complete archive of our ending. Then I packed the box away in a crate labeled personal, ready for the moving company to transport to my new Chicago address, neither prominently displayed nor discarded, simply acknowledged as part of the complex history I carried forward. Chicago welcomed me with a spectacular blizzard, turning the city into a crystalline wonderland that glittered beneath streetlights and transformed familiar urban sounds into muffled echoes. My new apartment, a vintage corner unit in a pre-war building overlooking Lake Michigan, was larger than my New York place, but still maintained the clean, uncluttered aesthetic I'd embraced post-divorce. The first weeks at Meridian Magazine passed in a blur of introductions, planning meetings, and the particular combination of excitement and terror that accompanies any significant career advancement. As features editor, I oversaw a team of writers while also contributing my own long-form pieces, a balance that demanded both creative and managerial skills. You're bringing exactly the fresh perspective we needed. Caroline, the editor-in-chief, told me after I presented my vision for the upcoming spring issue. New York energy with Midwestern authenticity, perfect combination. I smiled at her characterization, appreciating that in Chicago I wasn't David Matthews' ex-wife, or that woman who served divorce papers at her anniversary dinner, a story that had circulated more widely than I'd anticipated in certain New York circles. Here I was simply Eliza Spencer, features editor, new transplant, fresh voice. The anonymity proved both liberating and occasionally isolating. Without the scaffolding of long-established relationships, I found myself more dependent on my own company than I'd been in years. Weekends stretched before me with empty calendars. Evenings offered solitude that sometimes felt peaceful and occasionally lonely. I explored my new city methodically, approaching it like research for an article, visiting museums alone, testing neighborhood restaurants, mapping favorite bookstores and coffee shops. I joined a writer's workshop that met weekly in a converted warehouse space, finding unexpected camaraderie among strangers united by love of language. Gradually, tentatively, I began forming connections, first professional, then personal. Caroline and her husband invited me to dinner parties. Emma from the design department became a regular lunch companion. The barista at my corner coffee shop progressed from the usual to conversations about books and films. 3 months into my Chicago experiment, during a particularly brutal cold snap, I received an unexpected email from Amanda Parker. The sight of her name in my inbox sent a jolt of surprise through me. She existed in my mind as a character from a previous chapter, not someone who would intrude into my carefully constructed new narrative. "Dear Eliza," she wrote, "I hope this email finds you well and settled in Chicago. I came across your byline in Meridian's piece on urban renewal and realized you'd made a significant move, professionally and geographically. It's a beautiful article. I'm writing because I'll be in Chicago next week for a legal conference and wondered if you might be open to meeting for coffee. I understand if this request seems strange or unwelcome, and please feel free to decline. But our brief conversation in that coffee shop has stayed with me, and I've often wondered how you're doing. The firm restructured after your divorce, and I've moved to the San Francisco office, a fresh start that's been both challenging and rewarding. I thought you might appreciate knowing that your ex-husband and I have no contact, professional or otherwise. Again, please don't feel any obligation. I simply wanted to reach out in the spirit of human connection, however complicated our particular connection might be. Respectfully, Amanda." I stared at the message for a long time, cursor hovering between delete and reply. The request was unexpected but not unwelcome, more puzzling than upsetting. What possible purpose could meeting serve? What unfinished business remained between us? Curiosity ultimately outweighed caution. I typed a brief response. Amanda, coffee is fine. Thursday at 2 p.m., Elysian Cafe on Michigan Avenue. Eliza. The days until Thursday passed with a strange undercurrent of anticipation. I found myself wondering what Amanda might want, what she might look like away from the context of New York, what this encounter might signal about my own healing process. The fact that I could contemplate meeting her without emotional upheaval suggested progress I hadn't fully acknowledged. Elysian Cafe was busy but not crowded when I arrived, deliberately 5 minutes late to avoid the awkwardness of waiting. Amanda was already seated at a corner table, dressed in a tailored navy suit that looked expensive and conservative, the uniform of a woman succeeding in corporate law. She stood as I approached, her expression a careful neutral. "Thank you for coming," she said as we both sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted, declining a menu from the hovering waiter with a shake of my head. "Just coffee, please." "The same," Amanda echoed, waiting until the waiter retreated before continuing. "You look well. Chicago seems to agree with you." "It does." I studied her face, noting subtle changes since our last encounter, a new confidence in her posture perhaps, a slight softening around her eyes. "San Francisco must too." "It's been good." She wrapped her hands around her water glass. "Different firm culture, different lifestyle. Necessary changes. Why did you want to meet, Amanda?" I asked directly, not interested in prolonging small talk that served neither of us. She nodded, accepting my directness. "2 reasons, I suppose." She paused as the waiter delivered our coffee. "The first is simple human curiosity, wondering how you're doing, if you found some peace after everything. And the second? To apologize again, now that some time has passed." She met my gaze directly. Not a defensive apology this time, or one seeking forgiveness, but a more complete acknowledgement of the harm I participated in. I stirred my coffee slowly, considering her words. "That's unexpected." "I've been in therapy," she offered with a small, self-deprecating smile. "Turns out sleeping with married men isn't my only questionable life choice." Despite myself, I laughed, a short, surprised sound. "That's quite an admission. Painful self-awareness is my new superpower." She sipped her coffee. "Seriously though, I've done a lot of reflecting on my role in what happened to you. At first, I told myself I wasn't responsible for David's marriage vows, that I was just living my life and he made his choices. A convenient perspective." "Exactly. Convenient, but ultimately a cop-out." She set down her cup carefully. "The truth is, I knew he was married. I knew I was participating in a deception that would cause someone pain when discovered. I chose to prioritize my wants over your humanity." Her articulation of responsibility was so precise, so unequivocal, that it momentarily disarmed me. I had expected justifications, perhaps, or subtle attempts to distribute blame. This complete ownership was something else entirely. "Thank you for that," I said finally. "It's clarifying to hear. I've also been reflecting on why I was attracted to an unavailable man in the first place." She glanced out the window briefly, collecting her thoughts. "Pattern recognition isn't pretty sometimes." "No, it isn't." I thought of my own painful self-examinations, the questions I'd confronted about why I'd missed signs of David's deception, why I'd chosen such elaborate revenge rather than a simpler confrontation. "How are you, really?" she asked, turning back to me. Beyond the professional success, which is evident and well-deserved, I considered deflecting with a polite generality, then found myself offering honesty instead. "I'm rebuilding. Most days are good now. I work, I explore Chicago, I'm making new friends. I date occasionally without particular seriousness. And the anger? Comes and goes. Less frequent, less intense." I traced the rim of my coffee cup. "I've realized it wasn't really about you specifically." Her eyebrows rose. "No? It would have been easier if it had been. You were a symptom, not the disease." I met her gaze. The real betrayal was David's. Not just the affair, but the systematic lying, the performance of devotion while actively undermining our marriage. She nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Which isn't to absolve you," I added, not unkindly. "You made choices too, as you've acknowledged. But in the hierarchy of betrayal, his was primary. He did love you, you know." She said it cautiously as though testing dangerous waters. "Even during the affair. It was complicated. Love that accommodates systematic deception isn't love at all." The words came automatically, a conclusion I'd reached months ago. "It's something else." Possession, maybe, or dependency, or fear of change. Perhaps? She didn't argue, which I appreciated. Have you had any contact with him since the divorce? No. I shook my head. He sent a couple of letters. I heard he's dating someone new. Lauren Bryce? She supplied. Corporate client relations. Smart, divorced, age-appropriate? At my raised eyebrow, she added, San Francisco is far, but legal circles still gossip. Good for him, I said, meaning it. I hope he's learned something. I think he has. She hesitated, then continued cautiously. According to mutual connections, he's in therapy too. Declined a major promotion that would have required more travel and late hours. Apparently, he's been refreshingly open about the mistakes that ended his marriage. This new information settled over me strangely, not unwelcome but uncomfortable in its humanizing effect. It was easier to think of David as simply a villain in my story, rather than a complex person undertaking his own difficult reckoning. Why tell me this? I asked. Because I think it might help in some small way to know that the pain wasn't entirely pointless. She leaned forward slightly. That something constructive emerged from the wreckage, even if it's just personal growth for the people who hurt you. I considered this perspective. That's surprisingly insightful. Like I said, therapy. She offered a small smile. Expensive but effective. We fell silent for a moment, the ambient cafe noise filling the space between us. It struck me as surreal, sitting across from the woman who had once been central to the destruction of my marriage, having a remarkably civilized conversation about mutual growth and healing. Can I ask you something personal? I said finally. Of course. Are you happier now? In San Francisco, away from all of it? She considered the question seriously. Yes, not in a simple, uncomplicated way, but in the way that comes from facing yourself honestly and choosing a different path forward. She studied me for a moment. Are you? I think so, I said slowly. There are still difficult days. Moments when I catch myself reliving the humiliation, or questioning my judgment, or wondering what might have been different if you'd confronted him immediately instead of planning the anniversary reveal. I nodded, surprised by her perceptiveness. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Her voice was quiet but firm. The cold, calculated approach, it forced a reckoning that might not have happened otherwise. That's what I tell myself. I attempted a smile. On good days. When we finally parted an hour later, having moved beyond coffee to more personal conversation than I would have thought possible, Amanda offered her hand formally. Thank you for meeting me, she said. It means more than I can express. I took her hand, noticing the firm grip, the direct eye contact. Thank you for the apology. It was unexpectedly meaningful. If you're ever in San Francisco, she let the sentence trail off, acknowledging its inherent awkwardness. I'll look up a good coffee place. I finished for her, not committing to a meeting but not rejecting the possibility either. As I watched her walk away down Michigan Avenue, her confident stride carrying her back into a life that no longer intersected with mine, I felt a surprising lightness, as though another weight I hadn't fully recognized had been lifted. The meeting with Amanda had represented a form of closure I hadn't known I needed, a conversation that helped complete the circle of an experience that had fundamentally altered my life's trajectory. That night, I called Kate to tell her about the unexpected encounter. You had coffee with the other woman? She exclaimed, her disbelief palpable even across the phone line. Voluntarily? Without poisoning her drink? I laughed. It was surprisingly healing, actually. You continue to amaze me, little sister. Her voice softened. I'm proud of you, you know. For all of it. The revenge, the recovery, the rebuilding. You've handled this whole mess with more grace than most people manage in far less challenging circumstances. I don't know about grace, I demurred. I did serve divorce papers as an anniversary gift. That wasn't grace, that was style. Her laugh bubbled through the phone. But everything since then, that's been grace. After we hung up, I stood at my apartment window watching snow fall gently over Lake Michigan, transforming the vast expanse into a shimmering, otherworldly landscape. Chicago in winter possessed a stark beauty I was coming to appreciate. The brutal cold that demanded resilience, the pristine snowfalls that transformed urban grit into temporary art. I thought of Amanda's words about pain not being pointless if it led to growth, about David's apparent efforts to learn from his mistakes. Without fully intending to, I found myself retrieving the wooden box containing his letters and my unsent response. The envelope was where I'd left it, sealed and addressed. On impulse, I picked up a pen and added a postscript to the outside. P.S. I met Amanda for coffee in Chicago. We're both doing well. I think you will too. The next morning, I mailed the letter on my way to work, not as an invitation to reconnect, but as the final punctuation mark on a story that had consumed too many pages of my life. It was time for a new chapter, one written entirely in my own voice. Spring arrived in Chicago with dramatic suddenness, as though the city had tired of winter's prolonged occupation and orchestrated an overnight coup. My first Midwestern April brought explosive blooms in the parks, sidewalk cafes emerging from hibernation, and a palpable energy that transformed the urban landscape. At Meridian, my first major editorial project, a special issue exploring American identity through personal narratives, had exceeded expectations, earning industry recognition and increasing subscriber numbers. Caroline had responded with an expanded budget for my department and increased creative autonomy. "The board is impressed?" she told me during our quarterly review, particularly with your piece on the fertility clinic in South Chicago. The article had been deeply personal without revealing its origins, an exploration of how couples navigated grief and hope while pursuing fertility treatments. I had conducted intensive interviews with patients and medical staff, weaving their stories into a narrative that examined both private pain and systemic issues around reproductive healthcare access. What I hadn't shared with Caroline was that the idea had germinated from Julia's revelation about David's donation. The anonymous fertility fund he'd established had prompted me to revisit our shared grief from a different perspective, not as a personal failure, but as a universal human experience deserving of compassionate examination. "I'm considering developing it into a series," I told her, following several families through their fertility journeys over the course of a year. "Ambitious." She nodded approvingly. Green-lighted. "Take whatever resources you need." As I left her office, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael, a literature professor I'd been dating for the past 2 months. "Dinner tonight? That new Thai place you mentioned?" I smiled, typing back confirmation. Michael was intelligent, kind, and refreshingly direct, qualities I'd come to value highly. Our relationship was still new, characterized by mutual respect and a careful negotiation of boundaries that acknowledged both our interest and our caution. Unlike Nathan in New York, whose presence in my life had felt transitional from the beginning, Michael represented something potentially more enduring. At 43, he had never been married, but had experienced enough serious relationships to approach dating with both optimism and realism. His understanding of literature matched my own, making our conversations about books and writing particularly rewarding. What I appreciated most, however, was his patience, his willingness to let our connection develop at its own pace, without pressure or expectation. When I had explained my divorce history, in broad strokes rather than excruciating detail, he had listened without judgment, offering neither platitudes nor premature reassurances. "That sounds incredibly painful," he'd said simply. "Thank you for trusting me with that part of your story." That evening at dinner, over spicy curry and cold beer, Michael mentioned an upcoming academic conference in New York. "I'll be there for 4 days in July," he said, breaking off a piece of roti. "Would it be strange to ask if you'd consider joining me for the weekend portion? I know you have friends and family there you might want to visit." I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. "New York in July?" He registered my hesitation immediately. "Just a thought." "No pressure." "No, it's a good idea," I said, surprising myself with the realization that I meant it. "I've been avoiding the city since I left, which is silly considering my sister still lives there. 6 months seems like a reasonable buffer." I nodded, taking a thoughtful sip of beer. "It does, doesn't it?" The prospect of returning to New York produced less anxiety than I might have expected. The city represented both painful memories and important relationships, but neither seemed as emotionally charged as they once had. Chicago had provided not just geographical distance but psychological space, room to process, to integrate, to move forward. "I'd love to join you," I decided. "You can attend your boring academic panels while I catch up with Kate and friends." "Boring?" He clutched his chest in mock offense. "My presentation on postmodern narrative structures in contemporary American fiction is riveting, I'll have you know." "I stand corrected," I grinned, reaching across the table to steal a bite from his plate. Riveting academic panels. Later, as we walked along the lakefront path watching the city lights reflect off the water, Michael took my hand casually. The simple gesture felt significant, comfortable yet still new enough to register consciously. "You've been quiet," he observed. Second thoughts about New York? Not exactly. I considered how to articulate the complex calculus of emotions the city represented. More like acknowledging that going back means potentially encountering parts of my past I've been able to avoid here. Your ex? Possibly. I hadn't heard from David since mailing my letter 3 months earlier. Whether he had received it, read it, or reacted to it remained unknown, another boundary I'd established and maintained. But it's more about facing the whole narrative, I think. The places you shared, friends who knew you as a couple, the general geography of a significant life chapter. Exactly that. I squeezed his hand appreciatively. How did you know? He smiled, the expression gentle in the dim light. I once drove 300 miles out of my way on a road trip to avoid passing through the town where my college girlfriend and I had spent a transformative summer. Did it help? For a while, he shrugged. Eventually I had to drive through anyway. It was fine, anticlimactic actually. Just a town in the end. Just a city, I echoed, looking out over the lake. My city once. Maybe it can be again in a different way. That night I emailed Kate to share my plans for a July visit. Her response came almost immediately. Finally! The prodigal sister returns. I'm planning everything from Broadway tickets to that ridiculous brunch place you love. Michael's invited too, Obs. I need to inspect this specimen thoroughly. I laughed at her enthusiasm, feeling a surge of affection for my irrepressible sister. Perhaps Michael was right. New York was just a city after all. My history there included pain but also joy, loss but also love. Reclaiming it, even tentatively, represented another step in rebuilding a life neither defined by betrayal nor constrained by fear of repeated hurt. As spring deepened into early summer, I found myself increasingly settled in Chicago. My apartment had evolved from a transitional space to a true home, filled with art I loved, books that mattered to me, furniture chosen solely for my comfort and aesthetic. My work at Meridian provided both creative fulfillment and professional recognition. My relationship with Michael progressed naturally, neither rushed nor stalled by past wounds. One unexpected development was a growing email correspondence with Amanda Parker. After our coffee meeting, she had sent a brief note thanking me for my time. I had responded with similar courtesy. Gradually, these exchanges had evolved into something resembling friendship, distant and carefully bounded, but genuine nonetheless. We wrote about our respective cities, our work, books we'd read, occasional reflections on relationships and growth. We never mentioned David directly, though his presence lingered implicitly in the very fact of our connection. There was something oddly therapeutic about this communication, a reimagining of a relationship that had begun in betrayal, but transformed into something more redemptive. "Do you believe people can fundamentally change?" she asked in one email. "Or do we just become more skillful at managing our inherent tendencies?" It was the kind of philosophical question that characterized our exchanges, personal without being intimate, thoughtful without becoming therapy. "Both, I think," I replied after consideration. "We can't erase our core tendencies, but we can redirect them, channel them differently. The person inclined toward infidelity might always crave novelty and excitement, but can learn to fulfill those needs without betrayal. The person drawn to revenge might always feel that impulse, but can choose justice over retribution." Her response came a day later. "I like that, the distinction between eradication and redirection. It feels both honest and hopeful." On a warm June evening, as I was preparing for a dinner party I was hosting for colleagues, my phone rang with a New York area code I didn't recognize. Normally, I would let such calls go to voicemail, but something, intuition perhaps, prompted me to answer. "Eliza Spencer," I said, balancing the phone between ear and shoulder as I chopped herbs for the dinner's main course. "Eliza." The voice on the other end was immediately recognizable, sending an involuntary shiver through me. "It's David." My hand stilled on the knife. For a moment, I said nothing, absorbing the shock of hearing his voice after nearly a year of silence. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling," he continued into the silence. "I got your number from Mark. I wouldn't have presumed except I received your letter." "I see." I set down the knife carefully, moving to my living room window to collect my thoughts. "That was months ago." "I know. I'm sorry for the delayed response." He paused. "I've started and discarded dozens of replies. Nothing seemed adequate." The familiar cadence of his speech brought a strange dual awareness, recognition of the man I had once known intimately alongside acknowledgement of his current status as essentially a stranger. "Why call now?" I kept my voice neutral, neither welcoming nor rejecting. "I'm getting married," he said simply. "Next month." The statement hung between us, significant not for its emotional impact, which was surprisingly minimal, but for what it represented, the definitive closing of our shared chapter. "Congratulations," I said, meaning it. "Lauren, right?" "Yes." He sounded surprised that I knew. "How did you—" "It's not important." I watched a pair of birds chase each other past my window, their aerial dance carefree and purposeful simultaneously. "I'm happy for you, David." "Thank you." He hesitated. "That means more than you might imagine." "Is that why you called? To tell me about the wedding?" "Partly." His voice grew more careful. "Mostly I wanted to thank you for your letter, for meeting with Amanda, for ... He seemed to search for words. "For handling everything with more grace than I deserved." I considered his characterization so similar to Kate's. Grace wasn't how I would have described my actions, particularly the calculated public humiliation of the anniversary dinner. But perhaps grace wasn't about perfect behavior in the moment of deepest hurt, but about the larger arc of response, the eventual release of bitterness, the choice to move forward constructively. We both did our best with an impossible situation. I offered finally. "Some moments better than others. Your best was considerably better than mine." His attempt at humor fell slightly flat, but I appreciated the effort. "Listen, I need to know," I said, addressing the question that had lingered since my conversation with Amanda. "Did you tell Lauren about what happened between us?" "The truth?" "Yes." No hesitation in his response. "Everything. The affair, the lies, how you found out, the anniversary confrontation. She deserved complete honesty from the beginning." "Good." I felt a small tension release. "That's important." We fell silent for a moment, the miles between New York and Chicago seeming both vast and insignificant simultaneously. "I hear you're seeing someone too," he said finally. "I am." I didn't ask how he knew. The same interconnected circles that had brought me news of his relationship had undoubtedly carried information in the opposite direction. "His name is Michael." "Is it serious?" "It's honest," I said after careful consideration. "That feels more important than serious right now." "I understand that." His voice carried a weight of hard-earned wisdom. "More than you might think." Another silence, more comfortable than the last. In the background, I could hear city sounds, his New York to my Chicago parallel urban symphonies. "I should let you go," he said finally. "I just needed to speak with you directly, I suppose. To hear your voice and know that you're okay." "I am okay," I confirmed, realizing as I said it how true it had become. "Better than okay most days." "I'm glad." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. "You deserve that, Liz." "Everything good." The use of my old nickname sent a brief, bittersweet pang through me, not longing exactly, but acknowledgement of intimacy lost and connections severed. "So do you, David," I said softly. "Be happy." After we hung up, I stood at the window for several minutes, watching the summer evening settle over Chicago. The conversation had been unlike anything I might have imagined during the painful months of separation and divorce, neither accusatory nor nostalgic, simply human. When I returned to my dinner preparations, I found myself moving with a lightness that felt significant. David's news hadn't disturbed me. If anything, it had confirmed what I already knew, that life continued its forward movement for both of us, reshaping pain into growth, betrayal into wisdom, endings into new beginnings. Later that evening, as my guests laughed and talked around my dining table, Michael caught my eye from across the room, raising his glass in a subtle, private toast. I returned the gesture, feeling a rush of gratitude for this new chapter, for Chicago's embracing energy, for work that fulfilled me, for friends who knew me as I was now, rather than who I had been before. The divorce papers I'd served on our anniversary had been both a decisive ending and a necessary beginning. The ending had been painful but finite. The beginning, I was discovering, held infinite possibilities. New York in July was exactly as I remembered. Humid, vibrant, slightly overwhelming after months in Chicago's more manageable urban landscape. As our taxi crawled through midtown traffic toward the hotel where Michael's conference was being held, I found myself experiencing the city through a dual perspective. Familiar streets and landmarks overlaid with the emotional distance of someone returned from extended absence. "You okay?" Michael squeezed my hand, sensitive to the significance of this return. "Fine." I smiled reassuringly. "It's strange, but not in a bad way. Like visiting a place you lived as a child? Recognizable but different." Kate met us for dinner that first night, subjecting Michael to good-natured interrogation that he endured with admirable patience. "He passes inspection," she announced to me as he excused himself to take a work call. "Smart, funny, looks at you like you hung the moon, and didn't flinch when I mentioned the D word." "The D word?" I raised an eyebrow. "Divorce, dummy." She refilled our wine glasses. "Some men get weird about it, you know? Like they're afraid divorce is contagious or something." I laughed. "I've been very upfront about my past. No surprises there." "Good." She studied me over her glass. "So, how does it feel being back?" I considered the question, aware that my answer mattered more to Kate than she was letting on. She had worried about me intensely during the worst months, had supported my move to Chicago while clearly missing my proximity. "It feels," I searched for the right word, "resolved. Like returning to a place where something difficult happened, but finding the difficulty has lost its power." Her expression softened. "That's what I hoped you'd say." The weekend unfolded pleasantly. Michael attended his conference sessions while I reconnected with friends, visited favorite museums, and spent quality time with Kate. On Saturday afternoon, while browsing in a beloved bookstore in my old neighborhood, my phone chimed with a text from Julia. "Just heard you're in town. Dinner tonight? Mark's away on business." I hesitated briefly before accepting. Though we had maintained regular communication, I hadn't seen Julia in person since moving to Chicago. Her invitation represented another small test of my emotional equilibrium in this city of memories. We met at a new restaurant in Chelsea, neutral territory, unlikely to trigger specific recollections. Julia arrived looking much as I remembered, though her hair was shorter and highlighted, giving her a more sophisticated appearance. "Look at you," she exclaimed, embracing me warmly. "Chicago clearly agrees with you." "It really does." I returned her hug with genuine affection. "You look fantastic, too." Over cocktails and shared appetizers, we caught up on each other's lives. Her promotion at work, my success at Meridian, updates on mutual friends. She spoke freely of Mark, mentioning his business trip to London without awkwardness, acknowledging without directly stating that their marriage had weathered strains related to loyalties during my divorce. It wasn't until our main courses arrived that she broached the subject I had been anticipating. "So," she said, carefully casual, "I guess you heard about David's wedding?" "He called me, actually." I took a sip of wine, noting her surprised expression. "Last month." "He called you?" Her eyebrows rose dramatically. "Wow, that's unexpected." "It was fine." I shrugged. "Closure, I guess you could say." "Well, they got married last weekend. Small ceremony in Connecticut, very low-key." She studied me for any reaction. "Mark was a groomsman. I figured he would be—" I maintained my composure, finding it required no particular effort. "How was it?" "Beautiful, according to Mark." She twirled pasta around her fork thoughtfully. Though he said David seemed almost subdued throughout the whole thing. Not unhappy, just serious. Marriage is serious business. I offered a small smile. "Especially the second time around, I'd imagine." "I suppose so." She set down her fork, leaning forward slightly. "Are you really okay with all this, Liz? David remarried barely a year after your divorce was finalized. That has to be, I don't know, something—" I considered her question sincerely, searching my emotional landscape for any hidden reservoirs of pain or resentment. Finding none, I answered honestly, "It's not that it's nothing, Jules. Of course there's something poignant about it. But it's not painful anymore. The man I loved, who became the man who betrayed me, is now someone different altogether. Someone building a new life with lessons hopefully learned from our ending." I sampled my risotto before continuing. "I wish them well, genuinely." She studied me with a mixture of admiration and skepticism. "You've changed," she said finally. "Haven't we all?" "Yes, but you especially." She gestured vaguely. "You're more, I don't know, self-contained?" "In a good way. Like you found some center that doesn't depend on external validation." "Therapy helps," I acknowledged with a small laugh. "So does building a life entirely on your own terms. I envy that sometimes," she admitted quietly. The fresh start. Something in her tone caught my attention, a wistfulness that suggested deeper currents in her own life. "Are you and Mark okay?" I asked gently. She sighed, pushing her plate away slightly. "We're working on things." His loyalty to David during everything. It revealed some fundamental differences in how we view relationships, honesty, friendship. "I'm sorry." I reached across the table to squeeze her hand briefly. "I never wanted my situation to affect your marriage." "It didn't, not directly." She shook her head firmly. It just illuminated existing fault lines, which is probably necessary in the long run, painful as it might be in the moment. As our conversation shifted to lighter topics, I found myself reflecting on the ripple effects of betrayal and its aftermath, how the shockwaves of one relationship's implosion could reveal structural weaknesses in seemingly unrelated connections. David's affair and our subsequent divorce had altered not just our lives, but those of everyone in our orbit, forcing reckonings and realignments that continued to unfold even now. Later, walking back to my hotel through familiar streets rendered new by time and perspective, I called Michael to check in on his conference experience. Academic politics and mediocre coffee, he reported cheerfully. The usual. More importantly, how was dinner with Julia? Good. I paused at a street corner watching New York life pulse around me, diverse, frenetic, relentlessly energetic, enlightening in ways I didn't expect. How so? She mentioned David got married last weekend. I found myself smiling at a pair of tourists puzzling over a subway map. I realized I genuinely wish him well. That's... Michael seemed to search for the right response. Significant, I think. It is. I continued walking, phone pressed to my ear, the city's familiar rhythm a backdrop to this important conversation. It means I'm really free now, not just legally or physically, but emotionally. Free for what? His voice was careful, curious rather than demanding. The question gave me pause, not because I didn't have an answer, but because the answer felt momentous in its simplicity. Free for everything, I said finally. For Chicago and Meridian and summer by the lake. For writing stories that matter and building friendships that last. I hesitated, then committed to the vulnerability. For seeing where this thing between us might lead, without fear shadowing every step. His exhale was audible through the phone. I was hoping you might say something like that. Don't get too excited, I cautioned, though my smile was evident in my voice. I'm still taking things one day at a time. One day at a time works for me. His tone matched mine, hopeful but measured. Today seems to be going pretty well. It really is, I agreed, turning onto the street where my hotel stood illuminated against the darkening sky. Better than I would have imagined possible a year ago. The remainder of our New York weekend passed in a pleasant blur of activity, brunch with Kate, a Broadway show, leisurely walks through Central Park. On our final evening, Michael suggested dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline. It's touristy, he acknowledged as we were seated at a prime table with panoramic views. But sometimes the obvious choice is obvious for good reason. The setting was undeniably spectacular. Manhattan spread before us like a glittering tapestry, familiar landmarks illuminated against the night sky. As we enjoyed cocktails before ordering, I found myself scanning the vast cityscape, this place that had been home for so many years. Looking for something in particular? Michael asked, noting my wandering gaze. Not really. I turned back to him with a smile, just saying goodbye, I suppose. To New York? To what it represented. I traced the condensation on my glass thoughtfully. This was where I became an adult, built a career, married, divorced, rebuilt. The city holds so much of my history. But not your future? The question hung between us, weighted with potential meanings. I considered it carefully, aware that my answer signified more than geographical preference. I don't know exactly what my future looks like, I said finally, meeting his eyes directly. But I think Chicago is where I'm meant to find out. His smile deepened, creating the laugh lines around his eyes that I'd grown increasingly fond of. I find myself quite partial to Chicago these days. Is that so? I returned his smile, feeling a familiar warmth bloom between us. It has certain attractions. He reached across the table, taking my hand. One in particular. The gesture was simple but meaningful, a public declaration of connection, of possibility. I squeezed his hand in response, neither rushing toward definition nor retreating from it. To Chicago, then, he proposed, raising his glass with his free hand. To Chicago, I echoed, clinking my glass against his. And to finding out what comes next. Later that night, as Michael slept beside me in our hotel room, I stood at the window looking out at the city that had once been the setting for both my greatest happiness and deepest pain. New York glittered indifferently, neither nostalgic for my past nor invested in my future, simply itself, enduring and evolving like all living things. I thought of David and his new wife, beginning their life together somewhere in this vast metropolitan landscape. I thought of Amanda in San Francisco, redirecting her considerable intelligence and drive toward more constructive paths. I thought of Kate and Julia, Mark and Nathan, the constellation of people who had witnessed my unraveling and subsequent reconstruction. Most of all, I thought of myself, the woman I had been before discovery, during revenge, after divorce. Each version contained elements of truth. Each represented an authentic response to circumstances both within and beyond my control. The woman standing at this window in the quiet hours before dawn encompassed all these previous incarnations while transcending their limitations. I had served divorce papers on our 10th anniversary as an act of calculated justice, turning a celebration of love into a reckoning with betrayal. The symmetry had been deliberately devastating, designed to inflict maximum impact. At the time, it had felt like the only possible response to the magnitude of David's deception, a proportional counterbalance to 7 months of systematic lies. But revenge, however justified, could never be the end of the story. It was merely a plot point, significant but ultimately transitional. The real narrative continued beyond that dramatic confrontation, through the painful dissolution of shared dreams, into the tentative construction of new ones. As I returned to bed, sliding carefully beneath the covers to avoid waking Michael, I recognized that the true resolution of my story with David wasn't the divorce papers or the legal separation, or even his subsequent remarriage. It was this: my capacity to remember without pain, to acknowledge without bitterness, to move forward without fear. The next morning, as our plane lifted off from JFK, I watched New York recede beneath us, buildings shrinking to miniatures, then to mere patterns, then disappearing altogether as we climbed above the clouds. Michael dozed beside me, his presence a comfortable constant as we literally and figuratively left the past behind. Chicago awaited, my apartment with its lake view, my office at Meridian, the summer arts festival we'd planned to attend next weekend. A life I had built deliberately, mindfully, from the foundations up. A life that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. I wasn't naive enough to believe that pain never revisited, that growth proceeded in a linear fashion, that happiness once found remained unchallenged. There would be difficult days ahead, moments when old wounds throbbed with phantom pain, times when trust felt like a fragile construct barely worth the risk of its inevitable breaking. But I had learned something essential through the crucible of betrayal and its aftermath. Resilience wasn't about avoiding pain, but about moving through it with purpose. Healing wasn't about forgetting, but about integrating. And love, when genuine, was neither possession nor performance, but profound recognition of another's wholeness. The anniversary dinner where I had served David with divorce papers had been an ending designed as punishment. The life I was building now was a beginning designed as possibility, open-ended, vulnerable to disappointment, but also available to joy. As the plane leveled off above the clouds, I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to appreciate the moment of suspension, neither here nor there, released from gravity's immediate demands, transitioning between what had been and what might yet be. I never really loved you. The words I had once imagined saying to David in my darkest moments of betrayal now revealed themselves as the lie they had always been. I had loved him, deeply and truly. That love had been real, even if its object had ultimately proven unworthy of its devotion. The greater truth was this: I had loved and could love again without that capacity being diminished by betrayal or hardened by revenge. The heart, like all living things, possessed remarkable regenerative powers when given proper care and time. As Chicago appeared on the horizon hours later, its distinctive skyline emerging from the blue expanse of Lake Michigan, I felt a surge of something like homecoming, not the comfortable familiarity of returning to a place that had always been mine, but the more profound satisfaction of arriving somewhere I had deliberately chosen, a destination earned through difficult passages. Michael stirred beside me, following my gaze to the approaching city. "Home, sweet home," he murmured, his voice thick with lingering sleep. "Yes," I agreed, watching Chicago grow larger in the window, its buildings reaching skyward like concrete and glass affirmations. "Home,"